Hello everyone and welcome to Creativity, Technology and Social Good with CCI. My name is Georgina Capdevillacano and I am the Creative Learning Producer at the Creative Computing Institute within UAL. If it's the first time that you tune into Tech for All conference, welcome. And if you've already joined sessions throughout the week, welcome back. First of all, and before we jump into the exciting content that we've put together for you today, just a note to say that the live captions are available to you for this session. If you go to the bottom bar of the video, you'll see a little box with a few lines, which if you hover over it, you'll see the title, subtitles, and closed captions. If you enable this option, you'll be able to read through the captions throughout all the talks. Also, if you signed up to the event through the Tech for All attendee form, you should have received a copy of all the slides, which hopefully will help you navigate all the content that we will go through. I'm speaking on behalf of all the CCI team here. We are delighted to be part of this conference, which our colleagues from the Assistive Technology team at UAL and from across the University of the Arts London have put together in a collaborative effort. This morning will be packed with talks by staff members at CCI who will be sharing how they creatively reimagine the way we use and design technologies to create interactions, experiences, spaces, products, artworks, you name it, that bring people together in community, respect, beauty, and solidarity. These talks will highlight and demonstrate the power technology holds to change our visions for the future when working hand in hand with human creativity and a commitment to equality. We look forward to sharing the work that artists and practitioners at CCI are developing to challenge and change the way we see and design fairer, more inclusive and accessible worlds. On screen, you'll now be able to see the schedule of this morning's program. It would be wonderful if you could all stay with us until the end of the conference, but please know that if you miss any of the content today, you'll have the chance to catch up with it on the CCI's YouTube channel, as it will all be published after the session. Going back to the schedule, Professor Mick Grierson will kick off the session with an opening talk and will be followed by Phoenix Perry. And after, we'll have Dr. Pixcraft and Alex Befego with us. Lastly, after another 10-minute break, Andrew Mallison and Jasmine Morris will close the program with two amazing talks. So, let's get this inspirational journey started with our Professor Mick Grierson, Research Lead at UAL CCI.
Hi everybody and welcome to this special event on creativity, technology and social good with CCI. It's great to have you all here. Thanks so much for showing up. We've got an absolutely brilliant program for you. You'll have to excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather and my throat is a bit sore and my mouth's a bit dry, you know, all that kind of icky virus stuff. It's not coronavirus, I'm glad to be able to tell you, but it's still not very much fun, not a lot of fun. But I've got a few things I want to say. I also want to introduce some amazing people to you. So, but I guess I should start by introducing myself. My name is Professor Mick Grierson and I have the great honour of being the research leader at the UAL Creative Computing Institute. And I've been at UAL for a few years, and prior to that I was at Goldsmiths, where I did an awful lot of work, including leading the very first creative computing programs. Obviously, there's always been arts and technology work, but creative computing is distinct from a lot of other arts and technology work in lots of ways, in that it's not just about the gallery experience and technology through the eyes, through the lens of the arts. I'm not saying that you know arts and technology is always just about that, but creative computing is self-consciously positioned in a sort of STEM environment, and as a result, it is kind of fluid across a range of different research fields, including human-computer interaction, interface design, and systems engineering, you know, C++ programming as a kind of craft. So I think, and also different forms of programming and development, software design, all of these things. And although there are an awful lot of applications in those fields that I think are relevant for social good, in general, computer science is not really allied as strongly, or certainly wasn't back then when we started the creative computing project wasn't as allied as strongly with the creative industries and those concepts and ideas that accompany people in communications as it was with other types of incentives, for example, in financial services or in surveillance or in military applications. So I was very keen to try and think of a way to create a kind of a version of computer science that that met needs of society and humanity in different ways, different to that. And so I want to talk a bit about what that is, what that means to me, and also as a way to maybe think about where this is pointing and where it might go. And for that, really, we rely on the excellence of our contributors today, because really it's up to them and up to you. So as a way of explaining this a bit more deeply, I've been involved in creative computing and accessibility personally for, I guess, 14, 15 years in terms of funded research. Before then, my work was only really in computational media. And I got very interested in the relationship between computational media and accessibility, because I met a friend, and this is often how it happens. I was talking to a friend who ran a charity, and he said, we're doing this project with deaf school children, and we're struggling to get them to find different ways for them to understand and experience the sound work as part of that. And I said, well, I can probably help with that. And so almost by accident, I ended up building software in accessibility context. Often it was to do with music, because it's sort of easier in some ways to build interactive systems with music and to build musical instruments. It certainly was back then because of the computational power required to build. You know, it's quite hard to shift a massive load of high definition frames, especially when you have to set it up really quickly in a school and connect it up to loads and loads of people, or even in a gallery, which, you know, is the same set of problems really. So I did begin that work, and so the funded work, it sort of started at that point. I started to apply for research to sort of see what the intersection between computational media and creative computing and accessibility could be. So I did some brain-computer interface work. I did quite a lot of that over a 4 or 5 year period, and some of that work, I've written some papers on it from a long time ago. You might want to seek them out if you're interested in working with the brain. I, in particular, worked with Bram Harrison, who's called DJ iTech. I only had a few sessions with him, but Bram is a great guy. And it was about how, I mean, he's got locked-in syndrome, but he's also a DJ. And this is one of the first things I did, you know, how can we use BCI to try, you know, is it possible to use BCI, brain computing interfaces, to unlock those doors? Also, the projects that I did with the deaf community kicked off around the same time, and that led to something called Lumasonic, which is a design collaboration with Frank Barnes School and Whitefield School for the Disabled, which is the largest disabled school in Europe, or at least it was at the time. Also the Sonic Arts Network and BBC's See Here. And we built a whole range of different visualization tools, some of which are still used today by artists, community organizers, people trying to visualize sounds in ways which are, you know, a little bit more interesting than a graphic equalizer, let's say that. And then I began a 4-year fellowship all looking at accessible games, in particular trying to think about how we could create new forms of interfaces. And these included brain-computer interfaces, but also tangible interfaces, including, I made a whole bunch of devices, you know, that you squeeze and you push, with a collaborator called Dr. Chris Kiefer, who's unfortunately not here today, but he's a tremendous researcher at Sussex. He was my research assistant then. And that led to work at the 2012 Olympics in collaboration with Heart and Soul, who are an organisation I'm going to talk a bit about. And for that, I built 6 installations. They were designed in collaboration with people with disabilities. And that's lots of different types of abilities, right? So some people had to sit down all the time. Some people would have issues with certain kinds of controllers. So how do we make really accessible systems that everyone can use and everyone can really enjoy using? That was a great project and very successful. It was called the Dean Rodney Singers, based around a dream that this amazing musician called Dean Rodney had one day. So if it wasn't for Dean's dream, none of that would have happened. And a lot of that work I did was around autism and learning disability, as well as physical disabilities. So I've done a lot of work and published research building devices with a lot of these different communities, and there's a lot to say about that. We then did the Sound Lab project, which was a collaboration with loads of music tech companies, people like Novation and Native Instruments and, big time music tech, I guess, but also getting them into a room with people who have different types of abilities to sort of test their devices. And that was a very successful project. And now most recently I've been the last 2 years working at the Wellcome Hub. So this is a kind of I should have shown this graphic a little before. This is a kind of old stuff that I've almost forgotten doing, and there's a lot of work that went into all of this, and some of it's good, I guess, but what's going on now is much more exciting. So the last couple of years I've been working with Heart and Soul, who are a Deptford community-based arts organisation who are interested in representing and talking about the power and talents of people with learning disabilities. The thing about this project is there's lots of technology under the hood. There's lots of things happening. I mean, it's not really under the hood, it's on the surface, because Heart and Soul and the communities, people who work there, love technology, and they love music technology, and they love art. So they love the arts. So the idea of using the arts as a way to do data science has been the angle that we've taken. Can we use arts and creativity and technology so that everybody can use data science together? And so that's what we've been doing. And this is what we call co-research, right? So this is when it's not just me, the researcher. I'm helping, at the beginning, I explained what research was to everybody, and other people chipped in, and it was like a group thing. And then we developed tools together. No matter who you were all involved. And actually what ended up happening was that Pino here ended up leading the research group. And in many ways, what happens with the hub, Pino's the boss, so he's in charge. And I'm not joking, he really is in charge. And what he says is what we do. And his directions are the directions that we follow. And I think that's a really important and interesting perspective. And I just want to read a bit of this out. We're reversing the microscope that's usually on people with learning disabilities and autistic people so that they are in control of the questions we ask in our research. And I think that is an important perspective, and it's one that carries through and has value in lots of different areas of life. We also use some of that work in this Future Learn course, which is a course to help you learn how to create accessible interfaces. It's mainly focused on the web because that's kind of a nice place to start, and there's some programming and there's lots of discussion and debate, and there's a follow-up 4-week course for those of you who are interested in learning how to program accessible interfaces. But I think the fundamental rule and the lesson that I've learned from all of this work is that kindness is absolutely paramount. Kindness in all things that you do is essential. If you're not prepared to be kind, and you can't be kind, you can't really help anyone. And that's and you know what? They can't help you. And I think that's a fundamental lesson that everybody, no matter how young or how old you are, that's a good lesson. Also, imagination is essential. Imagination is right at the center of all the work that I think people are talking about today. Can you conceive of something that's different? Can you think of something which is in a different environment, a different world, a different way of solving a problem? And can we make people more free, not less free? How can technology emancipate? How can we democratically emancipate? How can we really genuinely be concerned about people's freedom and their rights? Now, this is not just about ethics or morals. This is also about the real needs of society. Okay? This is about what society needs. And more importantly than that, it's about creativity, passion, skills, and perseverance. I'm just going to move my window here because it's in the way. So I'm moving my head out of the way briefly. And so really computing is about unlocking human potential, particularly at CCI. How can we unlock human potential? Not just by focusing on the technical need, because it's not just about that. It's about on values, on rights, and on purposes. And that's why it's not just about morals. It's about society. Because it's not just about value, it's about people's values and about their needs and their communities first. And they're the golden rules. You know, I mean, there's probably more, but there's some rules. So that's what I've learned doing all of this. I'm just going to pull up my window again because, you know, then you can see me, although you've probably seen enough of me. Let's talk about other people. So who's talking today? Well, we have got the amazing Phoenix Perry. Phoenix is a trailblazer. She's worked in America, in the States, NYU, a bunch of other places. She's been in advertising. She's, you know, been very, very high up in advertising, and also has revolutionized the way people think about, the way lots of people think about programming, engineering in games, and in a range of other, I mean, I can't begin to explain all the amazing things that Phoenix has done. But she's going to be talking about alternative controllers, and I imagine one of those projects she's going to be working on is her research on Bot Party, which is an alternative controller. And following that, we have Dr. Peaks Craft, and they are a fantastic researcher who have joined CCI to run our Internet Equalities Masters program. Peaks, before coming to CCI, was at the Oxford Internet Institute and has a PhD from MIT, and has a track record in machine learning and artificial intelligence, but is very focused on a range of activities around social good. In particular, recently, Peaks has been involved with No Tech for Tyrants, United Tech and Allied Workers, and the movement for anti-oppressive computing practices. Following that, we have Alex Fafega, and Alex is going to be talking about the Great Black Hack, which is, as you can imagine, all about issues of race and representation and autonomy, and how facial recognition technologies impact upon that. Alex has done loads of work. He's a creative technologist based in London. Currently, he's an artist in residence at Google AI, kind of in collaboration with Google Arts and Culture, working on a music and machine learning experience, which is launching any day now. It's going to launch, and so I imagine he's stressed about that. After that, following up, we have a session on queering AI from Andrew Mallinson. And Andrew is a co-founder of Feminist Internet. And Feminist Internet have a very strong relationship with us at CCI. And it's great to be able to invite Andrew to give a talk, specifically presenting ideas about how the notion of queering AI can allow the development of new technologies that meet the needs and central the needs of the LGBTQ plus communities. And following that, we have Jasmine Morris. Jasmine Morris is a CCI person, educator based in London. Her personal practice and research explores representation and inclusivity within technology, and she's using virtual reality and open source game development tools in her own practice. She's going to be talking about how computational practice, gaming and cosplay are used as a medium for identity exploration and education, activism and outreach, which sounds absolutely amazing. And then after that, we have something else incredible. We have Ricebox Studio, who are brilliant. This website, if you've seen this website, it's absolutely great. And Ricebox Studio, fantastic, and we love working with them. They do such great work. Some of them are graduates of our program, some of them work at CCI, and that's going to be a fantastic thing. So I don't really have anything else to add. I think I'm out of time, so I just want to say thanks for listening to me, and just to say have a really great day.
Thanks, Mick, for this beautiful introduction to the program today. Now, I'm honored to introduce Phoenix Perry and her talk, Bespoke Video Game Controllers. Phoenix creates embodied games and installations and is the course leader of the MSc in Creative Computing at CCI. As an advocate for women in game development, she's done big contributions to the field of creative computing by founding Code Liberation Foundation, amongst many other initiatives. Phoenix, the floor is yours.
Hello everybody, I'm Phoenix Perry. I am the MSc course leader at the Creative Computing Institute at the University of Arts London. And I'm here today to talk to you not about our MSc program, which is amazing and outstanding. And if you want to learn creative coding, please come study with me. It is a great program. I'm so proud of it. And if you're interested, you can find me at the CCI. Feel free to reach out through the website or our Twitter. But I'm here today to talk about my creative practice. And I'm going to frame my work in the context of my ability, which I was diagnosed with a disability. Originally, it started in like 99. I got diagnosed with like 9 different problems. And eventually a doctor looked at me and put a systemic diagnosis together. And I've kind of had to negotiate technology very differently than other people because my body is not going to work with most interfaces. I managed to make it work by doing all kinds of interesting things like moving around a lot, changing input devices. But overall, this whole kind of technosphere has failed me as a user. And it has failed me in ways that have cost me in my right arm. I think it was 20% of my nerve endings. It took 5 years of my life away. I'm pretty, when it comes to thinking about these things, I'm pretty dead set on providing solutions and alternatives to allow people like me to control computer systems in any way that they think should work for them and how they want to create and be. Why should some massive corporation like Apple tell me how I should use my technology? I'm just not down with that. So this is a little bit about my research and my research into games specifically and game controllers. I build large, beautiful, playable worlds and tiny little playable interfaces. And basically I started building interfaces so I could go back to playing games because when the console controller came out, I couldn't hold the thing. I tried. I bought one. I picked it up. I tried to play Splinter Cell. I was so excited. And within 5 minutes, my hands were just numb and I couldn't feel my fingers. And I was like, well, that was a lot of money. So I had to really think about how I could make interfaces that would let me keep making and playing games with people who would be interested in playing with me or who also had abilities that were maybe outside or divergent from what surveillance capitalism deemed our interfaces should look like. All right, with no further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about my PhD research into this territory. All right, so great. Let's see. Spacebar. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to mention a tool that I've made at CCI with Rebecca Febrink called InteractML. I'll introduce it about halfway through the talk. But it's a node-based Unity asset empowering developers to make games and gestures. Let's see if I can do this properly. Here we go. The entire time my slides didn't have my name up. Well, Phoenix Harry, at Phoenix Harry on Twitter. You can find me. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about InteractML. And it is a node-based Unity asset empowering developers to make gesture-based physical interactions with video games. And so lots to unpack. And I hope that the intro I gave you about the work I do kind of tips you off that I think people should be able to make their own interfaces and developers should empower that. So this is a tool which does that. All right, so now we're going to move on. In this talk, I'm going to give a brief overview of post-cognitivism, which is a really fancy way of saying Western science has failed us. Perhaps maybe Cartesian dualism isn't the only way of thinking and being in the world, and maybe embodied computing and intersectional feminism might have something to offer. I'm going to position the current mental models at play in game controller design, and I mean that with the traditional corporate stuff that gets made. And then I'm going to look at the alternative community that I've helped build called the Alt Control Games community. And I hope you'll be able to see some of the really cool emergent opportunities there. And you'll be able to frame them as advances in user experience design. Then I'm going to do a quick overview of the target audience and the goals that InteractML has, and introduce InteractML, and introduce InteractML. I'm not going to do a live demo today because doing a live demo this way would be extremely difficult. But if you want to see a live demo of InteractML, I wanted to put it out there that you can book me at Calendly com/Phoenix Perry, and I will absolutely give you a live demo anytime you're interested. I have office hours that are open Thursday and Saturday to general creators, so feel free to find me there. Cool. So to really understand video game controllers, we need post-cognitivism. I really never thought I'd say that, but that's what doing a PhD does. So I'm really interested in embodied computing and in embodied cognition. So it turns out that a lot of the ways that we actually make sense of the world are not in our mind. And this is really counter to how Western thought has told us the mind works, right? Especially when we talk about AI, you just imagine this like disembodied brain floating outside of the body in a vat somewhere, super intelligence, right? Well, turns out that's not actually how intelligence works at all. And one of the biggest failures of early artificial intelligence was assuming that kind of position. Turns out that the body actually has a lot of cognition in it. And our bodies do a lot of information processing before that thought, like before that information even reaches our mind, before that sensation or, experience even becomes conscious. So a really good example are frogs. So frogs in their retina have these cells that are predisposed to see like dark objects that move in their field. And basically what that's for, so when like flies and stuff come in, their brain can like really quickly grab them. That's why frags, lol, fraggles, I would love that. Why frogs can actually grab flies with their tongue so fast, because they don't ever think about it. That cognition never even reaches their higher level states of like cognitive being. It's all happening in the eyeball itself, which is really cool. So their sensing of the fly is their knowing of the fly's existence, which is pretty profound. This kind of way of thinking works with humans too. Turns out we do a lot of cognition processing in our guts, which I found a recent study on this that I thought was really fascinating. And our bodies hold a lot of the same kind of knowledge. Fear is a really good example. If we think we're being threatened, we have a lot of responses that occur before our cognition even becomes aware of it. And we found this out like late 1800s. So this way of thinking is informed by phenomenology, and phenomenology is a kind of philosophy that really contested mind-body dualism. It said, hey, maybe the mind is not so separate from the world. And it thinks of perception as being intelligence. In embodied cognition, knowing is dynamic and subject to changes in the environment. It's not something that you just it's not declarative knowledge. It's not something you just hold on to because you read in a book. You learn by being in the world. You learn by your senses understanding the world. Cognition extends throughout the body, and it's not limited to the mind. And this is some work done by Lakoff and Johnson in 1999. Inactive cognition is kind of a development of embodied computing, and then let's see if I can remember this. Radical embodied cognition is another thing that has came out. I was right when I finished my master's, but it's like a further take on that even. So inactive cognition really, it borrows a lot from Buddhism, which they've revised the first edition of their book, Varla, Thompson, and Roche, to really recognize the contribution of Buddhism in a way that I think is more appropriate. But it emphasizes the iterative, temporally extended, and dynamic quality of embodied and situated cognition. So that's a whole lot of fancy words saying it really emphasizes the embodied experience and how it's dynamic and it's situated in our cognition. There's a tight integration between the person and their environment. This is called structural coupling in this theory. It's not possible to separate sensing and perceiving in the sensory motor loop. Our sensing and perceiving are the same thing. They're connected. And like I said, Varla borrowed the Buddhist phrase, laying down the path in walking, to capture the quality of the inactive approach. And if you've ever meditated or you've ever spent time in a Buddhist monastery, you'll know that you can't just tell somebody about the experiences you have when you're meditating. They are procedural knowledge. They're gained through practice. Distributed cognition kind of takes this a step further, and it looks at how there's some amazing books on it. Cognition in the Wild is one if you're interested in digging a bit deeper. But it turns out our cognition is super distributed through our tools and our environment. Sailors on a ship do this in amazing ways. Their cognition is split throughout the ship and the different crewmates. But pragmatic action is action that changes the world. So let's be basic and go over some of the basic things. And epistemic action, which I really care about here, is action that changes the nature of our mental tasks. This is going to come up again in the next frame in like how game controllers work in our minds. So been building up to how we think when we use game controllers. So a really good example of this is pen and paper. If you do long division, we actually, or long multiplication, we offload some of the cognition to like the paper, right? To the page. And if you ask someone to do long division without writing that stuff down, it is so much harder. But if you give them a pen and paper, they can, do it the way that you learned in school. And that process is actually part of the cognitive process. And Chris and Maglio have this amazing paper on distinguishing epistemic from pragmatic action. It came out in 1994, and I adore it. And the reason I adore it is it uses video games to validate the theories it presents. So they did a scientific study with Tetris, and what they did is they gave one group of people Tetris where you could rotate the pieces with the controller, just like Tetris that you've played your whole life. And the other group of people, they took the ability to rotate the pieces away from them. And guess what? The people who didn't have the ability to rotate the pieces could barely solve the puzzle. So it turned out the ability the controller gave people to rotate the pieces was part of the cognitive process of playing Tetris and part of its success. So I think that that's like a pretty clear indicator that epistemic action might have a huge impact in user experience design, and that some of the cognition that we're kind of using when we work with these interfaces is actually happening on the device itself, on the object you're interacting with. The controller and its affordances in the user experience design alter players' cognitive processes during gameplay. They alter them. They're not just some sort of brain doing, problem solving, using tool. It is actually just this integrated approach. And material engagement theory takes this a step further. If you're looking for something to take this and understand how it applies to human history and anthropology. So controllers are more than tools that let us play games. They're part of the sensory experience shaping players' very cognition. So here's some of the control schemes that we're using right now in games controllers. So abstract controllers. I've kind of named them that because they don't really have a name. I thought they were called abstract controllers. Turns out I made it up. Just totally made that up. Can't find it anywhere. But I like this term abstract because they're not actually connected to anything. You have to learn them. So WASD on a keyboard, if you've ever played a computer game, WASD, W, S, and A, and D are up and down and left and right. But you wouldn't know that unless someone told you, and you have to learn it, right? Some other examples of abstract controllers are knobs. You don't know what that knob does until you see how the game reacts, and you have to kind of form a mapping between how you understand the knob is moving and what it's doing in the game. Joysticks are very similar, and buttons. One of the things that I think is really interesting that I've noticed in my research is that joysticks, or the D-pad or the console controllers, actually takes Cartesian mapping practices and applies it to the controller with the adoption of basically a compass rose right on the device itself. So it infers this out of body, top down approach to spatial awareness, which is something I'm looking into presently. So in studies, abstract controllers actually do a better job and outperform embodied controllers on certain tasks, largely shooting games and other games which have been specifically evolved alongside the history of abstract controller and console controller development, which tells me something really powerful is going on in how the coupling between the game and the controller is occurring. So this design pattern originally shows up in 1958 with our friendly handy dandy joystick. So natural controllers, these are controllers that borrow from our proprioception of lived experience in the world. So they just take that mapping we know, like from riding a bike or driving a car, and slap it directly on the interface. Grand Track is the first video game to ever do this. Atari just literally took a car gas pedal and a car steering wheel and a shift, slapped it on an arcade controller, and people knew how to drive the car because they knew how to, or to drive the in-game car because they knew how to drive a car, right? So it's like A to B. And really a lot of other things that you've seen in games do this. Guitar Hero, shape of a guitar. Light guns, bam, bam, bam. Duck Hunt, drum pads. All these things come from direct natural mappings. And natural controllers are something that is they're fairly well documented and established in user experience design. And they are very easy to understand. They require almost no onboarding if a person has that cultural awareness. So they're still tied to the cultural awareness of whoever is situated in whatever culture. You still have to unpack that. But if it's somebody from the exact same kind of Western culture that you're from, or, not, kind of pointing to a discrepancy here in the term natural, and I hope you're picking up on that. But basically, these were created in 1972 and 1970. Yeah, that's right. Jeez, seems so old. 1972 to 1974, depending on whether or not you count for the first one which Atari made, which shall remain nameless, but I will hint at it is the first maze game. The interface is unspeakably sexist. So we're moving on. So embodied controllers. These are controllers that use the body. And again, Atari really innovated on this. Atari they blow my mind when you go and look at all the crazy user experience innovation that was happening at Atari early on. This was a mind controller, and they were describing it. You can't really read it very well. I kind of read it on my slides. I apologize for that. But they were advertising in some of their designs as like ways that disabled players could play. And it uses basic muscle tracking across the head. Very few of these ever went into production, but other systems have gone on to kind of pioneer in the same space. The Muse is a headset that's very similar, actually way more advanced, but it's picking up on a similar design and a similar kind of call to action that the brain should be able to control the interface. You also see it in Star Wars, which is something I picked up recently when I rewatched Star Wars. There's a brain control device in the reboot of Star Wars. You see it with the Kinect, the Wiimote, the PS Move, the Oculus Rift, and the HTC Vive. All of these game systems have embodied controllers. So these controllers are not physically diegetic. And what I mean by that is none of the game's story or game's narrative content is getting played out on the controller. The plastic itself is super ambiguous. You can play any game with them. They are just sort of, generic. So this is the original one, 1989, and this kind of stuff is really tied to the hardware industry, and there is a lot of cantankerous hacking going on because these capitalistic companies lock this hardware down, and people like me just don't have access to it. So I was a big part of the Open Connect community to try and bring hacking and machine learning to the Connect really early on because I needed that interface, and Microsoft, thankfully left a bug that they now say is intentional after it got hacked, inside and out. But also Sony's really bad for closing stuff up, and people have to the Move, literally someone did their master's degree to reverse engineer. So embodied controllers are not going away, and we really need better interaction design with them. Like the interaction design for embodied controllers is so pretty poor. The Vive has the best I've seen. Some of the Vive embodied controls are actually getting pretty intuitive. Rec Room has a really nice watch and backpack interface, so they're using metaphors in the game, and that's a pretty advanced step in the right direction. But we need more of that kind of stuff when VR designers are thinking about how to build these embodied experiences in VR space. So I think HCI has a whole host of what I like to call hot probs. And many of them, in my opinion, stem from like the history of war and surveillance capitalism, which runs parallel to the history of HCI design. And a lot of times what gets invented gets kind of pushed forward by like military industrial complex, by the military industrial complex and the aims they have for producing interfaces for, joystick, literally flying warplanes, and other things like radar and positioning, like flying drones. A lot of things are getting like really pioneered within like military industrial complex situations that I find really uncomfortable. Video games has a long history of working with the US military to produce basically propaganda. And human-centered design often makes assumptions about mass consumption. And that's another big problem I have with it, other than the fact that it's really tightly coupled to the history of war. It is very tightly coupled to the history of large-scale sales. Not scales, on a scale that like I could use or somebody else who might have a problem could use, but like thousands and thousands, millions and millions of users. So that is a goal. That's a goal of selling units. Universal design needs to go, in my opinion. And I'm going to say universal design did a lot of things right, but has become synonymous with user experience design over the last several years. And I think it's lost a lot of its way. So it was originally thought of as a way to kind of change the architectural built environment to be accessible for the largest number of people. And before we completely get rid of user experience design, I'm just going to say it hasn't even been implemented in large parts of the UK. Like huge parts of the UK are still completely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs or people who need any sort of assistive walking devices that just nobody can get up these tiny staircases and stuff. So basically, the big problem of universal design, the biggest one, is that it assumes that one design, can ever work for all disabilities. And that's just really not the case. Like, disability is not just like a one and done kind of situation. Disabilities are huge. They run the gamut. They can include physical disabilities, mental disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and dropping a curb, while fantastic and really needed, is not the end of things. Like, we need to actually really rethink what access means in a design space. So I'm really interested in looking at game controllers as in a way to explore kind of intersectional feminist practices, handcrafting, and crypt technoscience, as is proposed by Amy Hammery. They're amazing, and I really love their papers. I've been reading the crypt technoscience manifestos recently, and they have been fantastic. And what they're proposing is that disability is not something that should be engineered out of culture. It should not be optimized away, but rather we should think about how to integrate what it brings to culture in new and valued ways. Design justice is another approach that is worth looking at. It rose out of this, like an intersectional feminist approach that takes a lot from Crenshaw's work, Kimberly Crenshaw's stuff. And it really looks at how you would think about design in terms of the matrix of domination, which is a system of looking at different impacts of like intersectional overlaying social issues on top of each other. So for example, like if you happen to be poor, you happen to be, non-Western, or, from a culture that doesn't embrace like Western design principles, or you happen to be disabled, or like, it's like all these different things are going to hit. Like race is a huge one. It's going to, like, Black women and white women are going to experience the world radically differently because of all of these different intersectional problems that are not just tied to one thing, right? They're tied to like multiple layers of culture. So that's what design justice really kind of says. It really wants people to look at the intersectional way of thinking about design that really takes a much broader lens. And I think that design justice, there are a lot of things about the Allied Media Conference work on design justice that are very connected to my own practice and were, arising organically within my practice around the same time this theory was evolving. And my guess is that I am not alone. And a lot of women have been using, and a lot of people in general have been using ways to think about craft and making and the kind of craft maker culture that has been unfolding as an opportunity to really rethink how design gets shaped. So alt control games have been answering this call, in my opinion, in the video game space. So what is alt control? So originally I started a game jam with Chris Murio at NYU in 2012. And I started this game jam with Chris because both he and I were really interested in looking at ways that embodied computing could work in video games. We weren't happy with the solutions we were seeing, and we thought it would be really great to get a bunch of students together to hack on experiences. And some amazing distributed interfaces got produced. It was sponsored by Adafruit and Make magazine, and the first judges were Catherine Isbister and Kaho Abe, and it ran in 2013. Some Russian games designers reached out to me and Chris, and they asked if they could throw one and take the name, and we said, sure, why not? They did another one in 2014, 2015, another one in 2017. They've been running them quite regularly, which is fantastic. Within months, the name had spread to the Copenhagen kind of games creators after the Russian game jam, and they ended up doing alt control game jams there. And GDC brought it into the exhibition hall in 2014 when they incorporated it into the IGF as an award category in 27. Sorry, I said that a little bit weird. GDC did an alt control exhibition in 2014 in the main exhibition hall. And the Game Developers Conference, if you've never been, is one of the largest, most important games events that happens worldwide. It's where Xbox and PlayStation, everybody else unveils those brand new shiny consoles. And IGF is the Independent Games Festival. It runs kind of inside of inside GDC, kind of right before it. And they integrated the Alt Control Award in 2017 as part of the IGF, which is really cool. It becomes associated with alt as an alternative, and that has all the connotations that alternative has always had in indie culture, which is no accident, because originally when I was making it, I was thinking of alt.subgroup inside Usenet settings, and I thought that was really cool. For me, was one of the inspirations for the name. I wanted to call it alt something, and Chris came up with the control part, and that's how that got born. So there is also a parallel alt arcade experience happening on right now, which deserves separate study, and some of what I'm going to say is going to apply to that, and some of it is not. But that is an amazing kind of community, and there's a lot of crossover. So here's some of the lovely flyers. This was the original game jam that ran at NYU Poly Game Innovation Lab, and this is the Russian flyer from 2017 I found. I thought it was really great because it had a hack glove controller. A website where you can see games that have come out over the last several years in this kind of category. It's Shake That Button, which I adore. So I've been working for like a rough definition of what I think alt control games are. I have a few thoughts on this. So while I helped spark a genre, its rapid growth was more than I could have ever hoped for or even thought would happen. And it's produced a whole host of successful games. And what I've noticed by looking at all of these games and looking at how they work, I believe an alt control game is a game where the mechanics are embedded in the controller itself. So that means that like most alt control games cannot be played on a generic controller. The mechanic is actually in the interface. So the game would be very different if you try to play it on a standard joypad, if it was even remotely possible. The mechanic is kind of, you can think of it as the verb in a game, and it involves the controller. So if you think about that, like if the verb is touching, the game's controller is going to pick up and be part of and encourage and have the story of that touch mechanic on the interface itself. So it's impossible to abstract the gameplay away from the controller. They're tightly coupled. The procedural rhetoric is extended into the controller. And what do I mean by procedural rhetoric? I mean the system itself is the message, and it is in the controller. So the game is telling its story through the controller. In art games, like the three in question, and the three in question in this quote from Ian Begos, I think, are marriage, passage, and I'm going to space on the third one. But procedural rhetoric does not argue a position, as rather it characterizes an idea. And that's how Ian Begos defines procedural games. And that's what I think these controllers are doing. They're characterizing ideas on the control space themselves. Okay, so here's a couple of examples of these kinds of games. This is Pain Station, which is, as far as I can tell, the very first one. And all of these games arose out of art schools and the intersection of open source hardware like the Arduino and processing, Director, in some cases C++, the basic stamp controller. These interfaces, which had open source hardware and software, really empowered these kinds of interfaces to come to fruition, because it's the first time people control the software and the hardware. And Pain Station is a really good example of that. The game itself looks like Pong, but when you miss, the game punishes you by using pain as kind of a penalty mechanic. So the controller heats up, and the game actually has nothing to do with Pong and everything to do with who can actually take the most pain in the game. There's even a little whip that comes out and starts slapping you. It's kind of an amazing game. And it's a play on PlayStation and how painful some of those controllers have been to hold. So I kind of love that. Hit Me by Kaho Abe, Rosetta Parsons. It is 2 hack doorbell controllers in these boxes on construction hats. And the goal is to hit the other person on the head first. And then it takes a picture of the person you're hitting. Hold on, let me make sure this makes sense. It takes a picture of the face of the person doing the hitting from the perspective of the person being hit. And then it puts that on the wall. Later editions then tweeted it. And I just thought that was such a wonderful... Hit Me is just this wonderful like social critique around violence, and I love this game. It's also really fun to play. Maddie Bryce is another creator who's made some amazing alt control games. Touch Maddie and play this game alongside Maddie as the interface. So it's very embodied in quite a real physical sense. You're navigating around this little like maze-like world. Playing as Maddie. This movement is identifying some very interesting opportunities for user experience design in conjunction with game design. However, what they're not doing is making mass control devices. They're making bespoke, craft, handmade objects that are there as like conversation starters or community engagement within a community of practice. And these games are often situated within inside art galleries and games conferences. And they're more almost as provocation, as idea starter, as comment, as critique. And I think they're very valuable in terms of what they're offering. They're extremely well received within the games community itself. And I find that really encouraging. So it's a collision with crafting and maker culture, and it's no accident. Chris and I both were really associated. Chris is now a core member of NYC Resistor in New York City, and he and I both were like hacking and making nonstop. And we were not alone because we were making games and hacking controllers, but apparently by the success of this community nearly instantly growing out from like a weird game jam to like a global phenomenon, we were not alone. So designers need a better tool to make game interactions with, right? They need to have better ways to make expressive player customization, right? They need to really think about how to make games more flipping awesome. Because standard controllers now look and feel pretty boring. What if users could completely define their own interfaces based on their abilities? Dun, 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 dun. And this is what the tool that Rebecca and I have been working on called InteractML does. So InteractML is this really cool node-based interface inside Unity. And I am now going to just show you a YouTube video explaining it because I think it makes more sense. So I made it node-based because I really wanted to make it accessible to the largest number of people, and I didn't want to have to make you program machine learning algorithms to be able to train and use InteractML in a running, playing game. So hold on, now I'm going to show you a lovely YouTube video. Let's see how this goes. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Okay, let's see. Aha, I have it. All right. Oh dear. Please excuse me. I am trying to switch the video here in PowerPoint. All right, great, here we go.
Interactml is a node-based visual scripting tool for designing movement interaction in Unity. Perform your movement interactions to train Interactml's machine learning system. Then instantly use your movement designs to trigger events in your environment. A tool specifically designed for artists, dance practitioners, as well as game developers. The process is quick and easy, minimal programming experience required. Use any movement input, including virtual reality controllers, hand tracking with the Leap Motion controller, face tracking with AR Foundation, body tracking with the Kinect or motion capture system, or any movement sensor in Unity. For more information on our upcoming opportunities, including artist residencies, workshops, game jams, and hackathons, join our mailing list at interactml.com.
Great. And I hope from that you realize that InteractML is a large group of people now at this point, not just me. It involves a whole host of other researchers, which is always what someone working on software wants. They want their tool to grow into a community, which it now has. And it's bigger than me and Rebecca now. It involves so many wonderful and amazing people that you can read about on the InteractML. Shout out to Clarice, who was in that video and made it. She's been doing most of the heavy lifting design. Cool, awesome. So moving along, I'm gonna now talk about my game Bot Party and just show you some of my own work that I've made. Bot Party is a game that I really wanted to make to explore intimacy and holding hands with strangers in public. And as much as it has been a provocation for others, it has really changed my life, and the experience of touching 3,000 strangers in 1 year will shift how you experience reality. That would be the way I'd put it. So a little bit about Bot Party. It started off as a analog synthesizer and step sequencer that multiple people could play, and I call this one Baby Bot, and it evolved to this. And it's evolved even beyond this now, but this is video explains the mechanic really well, which is the touch mechanic.
Yeah, if you try and press buttons, you'll hear it'll cue you to interact. So try and press a button. And then if you two connect, you'll get a sound. So then I think this one is, and then that one I think is so stitch me. So then if you come in, you'll get a third sound. So that's how it works.
So it's the basics of Bot Party. It evolved to be have multiple modes. One of them where you have to touch certain people at certain times, and it gets faster and faster. It gets really manic. The controllers evolved to be see-through. Now they have vibration in them, which is some feedback I got from a blind player, and they're really lovely. This is kind of what they look like now. Cool. So you can play it in huge groups of people, like huge, massive groups of people can play it. So I think I have a video of that here. So that's kind of what it looks like when big groups of people play it. Here it was at RES, which is a game conference that happens here in London, and you'll see that groups of 3 to 5 generally play it, and they get very excited when they work out how it works. So that's Bot Party. This is a project I made at CCI with the MSc students last year, exactly this time last year, called Forest Daydream. I made it in conjunction with a whole bunch of other artists, Robin Bongard, who made Line Wobbler, Fede Fauché, Matt Jarvis, and of course the remarkable and amazing Ben Kelly, who did the sound in conjunction with the Wampi indigenous folks in the Amazon, recording the sounds from their natural environment. And this video game world brought into physical space really is a provocation to think about the collision of virtual and physical spaces, and in so many ways kind of foretold, I feel like, what was coming with our lives in the COVID world, where our physical world would be taken away and we were left with just a virtual representation of it. And the sounds are from the this community in the rainforest, and they really give you a sense of an environment and a place. And this game is just really a delight to play. It's got different experiences in it, different mini games that when you unlock, you can change the lighting, you change the sound. I put in a lot of objects. I think it's really important to have objects that are non-digital environments. I put in some of these cushions to really encourage people to play on the floor, and that definitely happened. There was a whole bunch of bouncing and playing on the floor. I don't think I included a video for Thrum, which is unfortunate. But my next work is to really clarify what I mean when I'm talking about bespoke controllers and craft. I think that a lot of these interfaces are specifically crafted, and I don't think that I ever want them mass produced. I want them to remain part of my artistic practice, and I want them to remain part of the dialogue of craft. And I really feel this kind of approaching interface design from the perspective of a kind of intersectional feminist perspective, where someone who's been working with disability is attempting to make games for a community they're helping to create as a experience to play with others. I really believe that falls within feminist practice, and I want to clarify that research a bit more in my PhD. And I really think it's time for a universal design critique. I'm really upset that it took Microsoft, I remember counting, I think it was 17 years from the original bringing out of the Xbox, either 14 or 17, the Xbox controller, to launch an accessibility controller. And this is really something that it burns me up inside when people bring out assistive technologies and then they charge more for them, which is what Xbox did. And you can't just buy a version of the Xbox with the assistive controller. No, you get to pay an extra $100 because capitalism. Might as well make money off people who have disabilities, right? Because they're loaded. Lots of feels there. So anyway, that is my work, and that is kind of what I'm thinking about, where my head is out. And I hope you took my lovely thoughts that are my PhD research, and it wasn't too painful and it was clear. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will absolutely answer them. Twitter @PhoenixPerry. I'm also phoenix.perry at arts.ac.uk. And that's it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And I really appreciate your time. Bye.
Thanks, Phoenix, for your wonderful contribution. We will now take a 5-minute break to grab some water, get some fresh air, and we will be back in 5. Thanks, everyone. again, welcome back. Our next speaker is Dr. Prickscraft with a talk named Algorithmic Bias as an Organizational Rather than an Ethical Problem. Pix undertakes critically oriented computer science research, academic organizing and community organizing, and has just joined the CCI to take on the role of senior lecturer and course leader at the brand new MA in Internet Equalities at CCI.
Hi, I'm Dr. Prickscraft, Senior Lecturer and Course Leader of the new Master's Program in Internet Equalities at the University of Arts London's Creative Computing Institute. Today I'll be talking about algorithmic bias and how to think about algorithmic bias as not just a technological problem, but also an organizational problem. This talk contains some sensitive content, so if discussion about racism, bullying and harassment, or state violence might be triggering to you, I'd suggest taking a second and perhaps coming back to this when it feels safe for you to do so. In this talk, I'll begin by discussing what algorithmic bias is for those of you who might be less familiar with this research area. Then I'll talk about some of the approaches that researchers and technologists have tried to mitigate the harms and negative social impacts of algorithmic bias. And I'll talk about why I think those approaches don't go quite far enough, and what I personally would like to do about it. So let me begin by describing a little bit about what algorithmic bias is. You might be familiar with the work of Joy Buolamwini, who famously, in experimenting with a facial recognition system in her office at the MIT Media Lab, found that this system was unable to recognize her face as a dark-skinned person until she wore a white mask. Joy, together with researcher Timnit Gebru, systematized these results, finding that many facial recognition systems consistently are less accurate, especially for Black women. These results are important not just because they mean that cameras or camera-based apps will work less well for Black women. There have also been examples of police arresting the wrong suspects because of errors that facial recognition systems have made. You might also have heard of the work of Safiya Noble, who in her book Algorithms of Oppression talks about how search engines like Google reproduce stereotypes and biases that are present in society at large. On the cover of Algorithms of Oppression is an example of a user having typed in "why are Black women so" in a Google search bar, which then has produced a list of offensive suggestions. This kind of effect is important not just because Google is producing offensive content, but also because search engines and information online shape how we think about the world and how we think about each other. Another example from last year is that of the UVQual A-level marking algorithm, which was systematically biased along class lines. The UVQual algorithm led to massive nationwide protests against the use of this system and subsequently the government's U-turn on its deployment. But algorithmic bias doesn't just occur when technologies make mistakes. Technologies can also demonstrate bias in how they're used. For instance, mass digital surveillance disproportionately impacts Black and brown people who are historically over-surveilled relative to white people. This is a case of a technology that is working as intended, but the intention itself is biased. Beyond algorithmic bias, we can also talk about algorithmic injustice more broadly. Shoshana Zuboff, in her book The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, discusses how a small group of extraordinarily wealthy technologists is exploiting billions of people and their personal data in order to create profitable advertising enterprises such as Google and Facebook. I've just reviewed some different forms of algorithmic bias. Now, let me say a little bit about how researchers and technologists have tried to mitigate the harms and negative impacts of algorithmic bias. One notable approach is researchers who try to make algorithms more fair. What this looks like in the case of facial recognition is such systems having relatively even error rates across different demographic groups. A closely related technique is called model auditing. In model auditing, algorithms or AI systems are investigated not just for whether they are fair or not, but also for what kind of data they're using or other impacts that the systems might have. At the design stage, approaches such as participatory machine learning have been developed, which aim to be more inclusive in who is involved in specifying the goals or the algorithms that are used in machine learning or AI systems. Another approach that's taken after technology has either been procured or deployed is policy oversight. The city of Seattle in the United States, for example, in its Seattle Surveillance Ordinance, mandates that municipal departments disclose the surveillance technologies that they're using and subjects those technologies to city council oversight. Many tech companies also have internal ethics or oversight boards. Facebook, notably, recently passed along questions about moderating the content of former President Donald Trump to its oversight board. Those are some of the approaches that have been taken to mitigating the harms of algorithmic bias. Let me now say a little bit about why I think those approaches don't go quite far enough. I want to argue that these kinds of AI ethics interventions are performative in the sense that they are theatrical, while also being non-performative in the sense that they do not achieve their intended effects. Researchers and technologists are awash with solutions for algorithmic bias, but only with a paradigm of the inevitability of the technologies themselves. Non-performativity is a concept that was introduced by Sarah Ahmed. I also must give a hat tip here to the philosopher Anna Lauren Hoffman for having first applied this concept to AI ethics. Sarah Ahmed builds on the work of Judith Butler, who wrote about the performative aspects of gender. Butler argues that gender is performative in the sense that performing gender roles actually creates gender. Ahmed flips this concept on its head. In talking about diversity work at universities, Ahmed argues that such work is often non-performative in the sense that the work does not accomplish what it intends to accomplish. It can be even worse. Diversity work at universities can also prevent other people in those institutions from having the resources to be able to make more effective interventions. I'll argue that AI ethics is non-performative in this sense because the kinds of approaches that are typically taken to mitigating algorithmic bias do not achieve the fundamental goal of making just systems, predominantly because such interventions do not address more fundamental issues related to the intention and function or intended function of those technologies and the interests of those companies or people who are creating these technologies. Let me take an extreme example to illustrate the point. Consider the United States Pentagon, the US Department of Defense, which has its own AI ethics principles. The US Department of Defense considers questions like what kinds of policies should be in place for the deployment of lethal autonomous weapons, things like autonomous drones. In applying the AI ethics principles that the Pentagon has developed, they might ask, how can drone strikes be distributed equitably? This hypothetical example illustrates the point that asking about the equitability of a technology like an autonomous drone neglects the broader issue of the injustice of US military intervention. Another company, Axon, which is the developer of police technologies like tasers and body cameras, has its own AI ethics board that has considered questions like whether or how to deploy facial recognition software in its body cameras. Body cameras are a technology that research has shown are actually ineffective at reducing police violence and therefore function mainly as another tool for mass digital surveillance. In considering a question like whether to include facial recognition systems in body cameras because of their inaccuracy across demographic groups, Axon is neglecting the broader issue that body cameras, as they stand right now, are contributing to the unjust surveillance of the police as they're currently deployed. Google had its own AI ethics board for, in fact, fewer than 10 days after facing protests both from within the company and from the public at large for its inclusion of a leader of a major conservative think tank and notorious transphobe. You might think, though, from their initial formation of this high-profile AI ethics board, that Google is quite committed to thinking through questions of AI ethics. Yet when we look at the protests that workers at Google made against Google's participation in the military-industrial complex and its contracts with the Pentagon for software in autonomous drones, and we look at the response that Google had to this and other protests, like the mass Google walkouts when workers protested Google's lack of action on sexual harassment by company leadership, we see that rather than rewarding these employees who are raising these important ethical issues, Google instead retaliated against those who are organizing these important initiatives. I've just highlighted some of the contradictions around companies and states that are participating in forms of AI ethics interventions. Now, let me say more about how, when these actors focus on algorithmic bias as being a technological problem, one that can be solved by making facial recognition more fair or by ensuring that software operates evenly across different demographic groups, neglects the problems of algorithmic bias that are organizational. Another example from Google is that of Timnit Gebru, whose name you might remember from her work with Joy Buolamwini on facial recognition and its bias. Timnit recently wrote a paper about the biases in large language models as well as their climate impacts. Timnit, being a worker at Google, and in fact also one of the managers of Google's AI ethics research, was subsequently fired by the company after publishing this paper. What this example illustrates, much like the retaliation against the organizers behind the Google walkouts and Google's participation in Project Maven or its contracts with the US Pentagon, shows that those who point out issues, even when those issues are technological, are still punished as organizational practice. Therefore, the perpetuation of algorithmic bias, such as that which was highlighted by Tim Neat, are secondary to the application of systems like large language models that are core to the business of Google, such as serving search results or ads. These problems of an organizational nature are not unique to the tech industry or big tech. We can also look at the academic research communities that are thinking about AI ethics. The ACM Conference on Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency is one notable conference that's existed now for a few years. Initially, FACT, as this conference is called, was a place where researchers were publishing work that was largely about issues like how to define algorithmic fairness mathematically. Over the years, the amount of social science and philosophy and even art dealing with the social issues around AI increased in prevalence in this community. Those who were studying the mathematics of algorithms then formed their own conference, the Symposium on the Foundations of Responsible Computing, or FORC. This divide illustrates a cultural divide within the tech industry and those interested in technology between those who take seriously and do their work on the social impacts of technology versus those who are primarily concerned with technological development. Here we see an organizational problem in the organization of the field of AI ethics. Not without some irony, actually both of these areas, the more critical side of AI ethics and the more quantitative side of AI ethics, are funded substantially by companies in big tech. Many of the organizers and participants at both FACT and FORC are either researchers at Google or ethicists at Google or at other companies. The participation of big tech in this space stands alongside the systematic exclusion of marginalized groups in the area. White men are substantially overrepresented in the tech industry, and this overrepresentation is reinforced by poor accountability for issues like bullying and harassment that disproportionately affect gender and racial minorities in the field. What this creates is an unwelcoming environment and skewed demographics in the field that then reproduces the same cultures that prevent issues like algorithmic bias from being taken seriously by both researchers focused more on quantitative sides or by tech companies. We can also see how these organizational problems are supported by other sources of funding. Stephen Schwartzman, CEO and founder of the Blackstone Group, the largest rental real estate owner in the world following the financial crash about a decade ago, where Blackstone bought up repossessed houses and then rented them, in many cases, to the same people who had previously been living in those houses. Gave a historically large gift recently to the University of Oxford to form its new Center for the Humanities, within which Stephen Schwartzman insisted there be an AI ethics center. Stephen Schwartzman, who is a notable confidant of Donald Trump and has been throughout former President Donald Trump's tenure in the presidency, across the incidents in Charlottesville and more recently the Capitol attack, as well as Trump's racist immigration policies and many missteps and offensive remarks. What makes Stephen Schwartzman interested in AI ethics, or what kinds of AI ethics is Stephen Schwartzman interested in? Oxford is not the only place where Stephen Schwartzman has invested in AI ethics. Schwartzman also funded the MIT College of Computing to a large sum, as well as the Schwartzman Scholars Program in China. At Oxford, Schwartzman also insisted that the AI Ethics Center there be purely philosophical. Looking more closely at MIT, we can also see that MIT, which along with many other elite institutions and research universities, is one of the main actors in the production of the research behind facial recognition systems, which in some cases have been directly provided or formulated in partnership with agencies like companies in China or the Chinese state for use in the systematic oppression of the Muslim minority in China, the Uyghur people in the Xinjiang or East Turkestan region. MIT, therefore, along with many other institutions, is involved in what for them is the profitable business of building surveillance technologies that are being used by, in this case, state actors for the oppressive enterprise that is required for those states to maintain their own power. This example connects to a point made by Simone Brown in Dark Matters, where Brown points out that surveillance not only disproportionately impacts Black and brown people, but actually surveillance also in part constructs what Blackness is. Blackness as a construct that in the United States was used to justify slavery and more recently the profitable enterprise of prison labor, and here in the UK has played a role in the Windrush scandal and the abuse of labor of Black and other people of color, is therefore reinforced by these digital surveillance systems. Companies then who are engaged in the research and development of mass digital surveillance technologies, whether it be for state or commercial interests, are therefore reproducing the kinds of systematic inequalities that historically have been the forces for economic development in places like the United States and the UK. Putting these pieces together, we can view tech as just a component of the organized exploitation along racialized or gendered lines. I've just given a little bit of an overview of the arguments that approaches that are taken to mitigating algorithmic bias don't go quite far enough because they don't engage with the organizational problems of AI and information technologies. Let me now talk about what I personally am hoping to do about this situation. There are three factors that I'm currently focused on. One is taking personal responsibility. In many cases in conversations about AI ethics, the finger is pointed at someone else. I've been guilty of this myself in this talk, pointing the finger at MIT, pointing the finger at the University of Oxford. Taking personal responsibility means recognizing personal complicity. For instance, I received my doctoral degree from the MIT Computer Science Department, and I was recently a faculty member at the University of Oxford. I spend a lot of time thinking about what I can do both to dismantle my own privilege as well as to dismantle broader systems of white supremacy and the heteronormative patriarchy. I'm guided in this work by inspiring recent efforts such as Design Justice, Data Feminism, or Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life. The second component of what I've been thinking about recently is engaging in a different kind of theory of knowledge production. What I mean by this is that the tech sector and academic technologists must move beyond thinking close-mindedly about technology as purely computational or quantitative, and instead engage with an understanding of knowledge production that recognizes different kinds of knowledge and the situatedness of all knowledge. That is, valuing what all people, by nature of being people, bring to understanding the impacts and development of, in this case, AI or information technology, as well as considering the material impacts of these technologies, both on the environment and on people's material conditions. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I'm trying to focus on work that begins not with the specification of a problem and not with a research question, but instead with a theory of social change. My own theory of social change emphasizes the necessity of collective action, as well as the importance of building coalitions. I take inspiration for this kind of work from authors like Adrienne Marie Brown in Brown's Emergent Strategy, as well as groups like the student-led grassroots No Tech for Tyrants organization in the UK that is casting light on the human rights abuses of companies like Palantir in their collaborations with the universities and governments, or the UK's first tech workers union, the United Tech and Allied Workers Union. Finally, I hope to be able to explore all of these kinds of ideas and more including radical re-envisionings of alternative ways of producing or conceptualizing technology and its role in the world through the Creative Computing Institute's new master's program in Internet Equalities. I'd love to talk about any of these topics with you or anyone you know who might be interested, whether it's in this program or about any of these areas of research that I've been describing. I've included here on the slide the email contact for the Creative Computing Institute, as well as my Twitter handle. I hope you have a peaceful day.
Thanks, Brix, for this lovely introduction to your work and approach to your research. We're super happy to have you as part of the team here at CCI, and we can't wait to see the first cohort of students in the MA in Internet Equalities come together for the next academic year. Moving on, we've got with us Alex Fefega, co-founder and director of creative technology at London-based design studio Community. He's also an artist in residence at Google AI in collaboration with Google Arts and Culture, and he's an associate lecturer at the CCI, teaching a module on computational futures and artificial intelligence. On this talk, Alex will be exploring the attack on human agency and autonomy by facial recognition technologies.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Fefega. I'm here to deliver this talk, The Great Black Hack, How Can We Protect Activists from Technological Policing? So, I'm Alex Fefega, I'm from Peckham, South London. I love to make radical and playful things with tech. I studied a Masters at University of Arts London at Central St. Martin's. My thesis was on looking at using design as a tool to explore ethical features with artificial intelligence. I co-founded a studio many years back with two of my best friends. It's called Community. We do some really interesting work and it pays my bills, but I also teach 1 day a week at the University of Arts London Creative Computing Institute. I'm currently teaching a module on introducing computational futures and artificial intelligence, where the class is being exposed to different machine learning frameworks and using it as a tool to be able to explore the ways and how we can be creative with machine learning technologies. Activism is important, I've very much been inspired by activism, especially being a black person. I was inspired by some of the initial, actions by the Black Panthers in America, and also by the Black Panthers Party, who actually were here in the UK. It's really interesting, the events that are going on in the world, that sometimes it feels like these things in the UK don't happen. There's this gloss on the, some of Britain's history in terms of the treatment of black people, and for these individuals here who are able to fight against police brutalism, fight against a lot of things, has provided loads of opportunities that now me myself down the line can benefit. So even myself back in 2016, I took part in the Black Lives Matter protest then. I didn't take part in it in the recent one, just obviously due to what's going on in the world right now. But these things are super, super important. This is the vehicle where communities can come together and show that resilience and show that resistance, But there's been an interesting thing, right? There's an interesting thing that is changing right now, which is quite uncomfortable. I work with technology. I work with, facial recognition models to create some wonderful experiences. But one of the things I always say to my students, right, is the same ML models we're going to use for creative purposes are the same ML models that are going to do harm. And so, as you can see down the screen, I've got a number of slides of just things in the world, like, did you protest recently? Your face might be in a database. cops in Miami and New York City arrest protesters from facial recognition matches, or we have defund facial recognition. I am a second generation black activist and I'm tired of being spied on by the police. As global protests happen, facial recognition technologies must be banned. Or an article that I saw, activists turn facial recognition tools against the police. And it says, we're now approaching the technological threshold where the little guys can do it to the big guys, one researcher said. And that's kind of where that quote there is kind of the angle that I'm going to come with this talk. And obviously that title of The Great Black Hack, I always say this about computers and working with technology in this world of talking about artificial intelligence. And, it's the way how it's framed a lot of the times is that, computers are these omnipotent, intelligent entities that know it all. And I've always had this notions that computers are stupid. They just make our human mistakes faster. This was something from a while back ago when I was teaching, I think 2019. I remember teaching, this is a face recognition model. This model is, I think it's MobileNet. I'm going to believe it's MobileNet. Forgive me. And one of my students of South Asian descent places a hand in the shape of a gun, or, gun fingers. Her skin is quite brown. And she's got, metallic rings and a finger. And it was really interesting for me at the time because I was like, hold on, how did it detect this was a 6-revolver gun? What was those, where did it discover this from? How did the model be able to predict that? That was probably one of the few things the model at the time predicted really well. And so I had to go look back into the past and try to understand how the machine learning model is kind of compiled together. I didn't actually have I didn't have no slides today on the machine learning part. I actually took it out because I wanted to make this talk a bit shorter. But if you think of it, for a machine learning model to be able to make a prediction, that's what machine learning models do. They make predictions. They need to be trained on data. They need data, they need to be fed data, you need to give a model data in order for you to ask the model to do something for it to make a prediction. In the context of the image on the screen, the model's made this prediction that this person, or the model made a prediction that this person who's made as gun fingers is framed as a revolver 6-gun 6-shooter. So the first question I ask myself is, what is the data that has been used to train this machine learning model that's obviously recognizing this gun finger? How did it come to this conclusion? And what I found out, right, was that, the machine learning model is trained off images that was found on the internet. And these images on the internet may have been tagged in particular ways. And, you train the model this, and over time, every time the model cycles through the data, hopefully the model should be getting better at prediction. And so in this case here, I don't know if it saw many fingers like this. I have no idea. Some of the questions could be, is it because of the silver rings? Is it because of the color of the skin? These are the things that open up the door to research. But it also is some of the things that intrigues me into the next thing that I want to talk about, bias in AI systems. We as human beings, we constantly analyze the world around us. We see, label, and make predictions and recognize patterns. And that's where bias can creep in, right? We talk about this in the context of facial recognition technologies, and there have been a lot of work already or by researchers who've been trying to, make arguments and why, machine learning technology should not be used in law enforcement. One of the stories I have is a story that I kind of based my master's thesis on, really. It was a story of a young lady in Florida. She was somebody that has got in trouble in police a number of times, and she got arrested. And this time round, in the state, in the criminal justice system in the state of Florida, they had, got a new technology, a new software called Compass, and Compass has framed itself as this tool where it would be able to assess it would be able to assess how likely somebody was most likely going to reoffend. And this, if you're interested in this was an article called Machine Bias. I feel like if you just search that up in Google, it should just come up. I remember one of the authors was Julia Angwin. Her work is amazing. And in that research and that study, they were trying to understand how, when it came to black offenders, when they were doing a comparison between black offenders and white offenders, the comparisons they were trying to explore was, hold on, wait a minute. How is this individual who has, maybe this is their first offense, versus comparing that with somebody who was a seasoned, maybe what I would make call a seasoned criminal. The seasoned criminal was seen as most likely to reoffend, while this young black individual who probably is their first time was seen as most likely to reoffend. And a lot of the times in those conversations, people blame the algorithm. They say, oh no, it's the algorithm that did that. And, working with algorithms for a long period of time, algorithms are designed to achieve a task at hand that it's meant to achieve. The algorithm did the task. It made a prediction. It's made its prediction because it's been fed some data. Where does that data come from? And in the case of that particular project, the data for the algorithm to make those predictions, it came from a questionnaire. And on this questionnaire, you were told to ask some questions, and in the questions, you would give it based on the questions, certain questions would be like, how many of your friends have been to prison? I'm trying to think in my head if there's any more. That was a popular one. Or like, have you ever been to prison yourself? Or is your mum and dad married? Like, particular questions which might not necessarily be linked to, that asks you, are you black or are you white? But if you were to do social studies or, look at that context of that questionnaire, right? It's trying to build a profile of an individual through those questions. And the model has been trained on previous survey answers, and this model generates that. And so that leads me to this definition of bias in AI systems. And bias occurs in AI systems when they reflect human biases held by the people involved in coding, collecting, selecting, or using data to train the algorithms that power the AI. And so that's how I define bias. And when we bring it back to, protest environments, right? We've already been aware, as black people, we were policed before technology. We've been policed for a long time. Now technology just enables us to do that faster. Now we can do that at mass scale. Now it isn't no longer, and it's even worse because now it ain't just me where it's like, I see free, black guy, tall, dreadlocks, locks, in that case. It's now Alex Fafega. We've got him. And that for me was really interesting, right? Because it kind of removes the autonomy. It removes the agency, Being able to protest is a right. It's a human right. And being able to protest, maybe especially in a country like the UK and hopefully in countries like the States, this should be a place where people are entitled to a fair protest, and you can see it, right, with some of the recent events in the world that I won't talk about in the States where, people were able to enter the Capitol, I can never pronounce it correctly, my bad, and were able to just enter and there was really not that much police enforcement over there, right? And you compare that to maybe some of the Black Lives Matter protests that happened. That was, you saw the brute force that police officers carried, and so I've kind of been inspired, or have been inspired with my friends Akil and Richard, and who happen to be my co-founders at Community, and And we had the opportunity to explore, can we create a speculative publication that could allow us to engage in this topic of facial recognition. So the tool that I probably want to introduce first really quickly is design fiction. So, divine fiction is very important to this because in my master's I came across design fiction, also known as speculative design, design features, critical design. There's so much definitions for it. But one of these definitions I use here is by Matt Marpus, who's very familiar at University of Arts London, especially from the CSM product design side. He defines design fiction as a design and related approach rather than a practice that enables the exploration of novel possibilities through the creation of functional fictional features. Through the creation of fictional prototypes, designers are able to establish compelling visions of alternative realities and speculative futures. And I think this is by Uga in 2013. And I kind of actually write about this in a blog that I released in 2019, which is a snippet of my master's thesis. It's called Future Orientated Design. Definitely do have a read. And one of the key things I talk in future orientated design was kind of taken from, when you think of speculative design and design fiction, this tends to be one of the more famous, literatures or books that gets cited a lot. Speculative Everything, written by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby, who were initially at the Royal College of Art and I think they have moved on to Parsons School of Design. I'm not sure if they're still there. And if I go back to this, in this future-oriented design, I kind of give this sort of literature review on what design fiction is, the different thoughts and perspectives, but I also talk about the limitations and the criticisms of speculative design. One of the more common ways of speculative design that maybe, or an example which people maybe conflate or say is speculative design as Black Mirror, where you've got this really dramatized environments that at times can be very, sometimes, film and movies are really good with creating these alternative, negative futures of the world, which at times, sometimes it's not really, maybe at that time, not as grounded in reality as we know it. One of the critiques I also have of, the tool design fiction is that I always say that it focuses on the 1%. It focuses on, people with privileges, and when we, privilege could mean even myself. I can consider myself a very privileged individual, working in technology, working with technology, access to technology. And when you have those three things, it enables you to have a quality of life or disposable income or access to knowledge, which allows you to be privileged. So all of these cool future technologies or stuff will cater to me and others who exist in that 1%. But a lot of the times, they always miss out the 99%. What happened to those communities in those futures who will be necessarily exploited for these futures to happen? And so I've kind of been critical in terms of design fiction, maybe in the context of this book like this. I'm not going to go into this a bit too much. I think it's still a very good book if you're trying to wrap your head around it. But I want you to read this book and I want you to engage in it with a level of criticality for those who are very interested in this book. This is a book I also like. I think I went to the launch. I think I went to the launch. I think I was studying at CSM in the Masters at the time. And this is a book by Matt Malthus, who I mentioned, Critical Design in Context, History, Theory, and Practice. And I think, these two books are they're different in their writing style. And obviously, Speculative Everything focuses on speculative design. Matt, in this case, in this book, focuses on critical design, where they might have similarities. I don't think these books don't sing from a similar hymn sheet. And I think they're two good books. And they're probably more, but these are the books I could remember off my head that definitely helped me a lot when I was exploring this space. And the other area or technique I want to introduce us to, which is important to this project, is called adversarial machine learning. And so it's simply a technique focused on fooling machine learning models, and it's simply, we could call it optical illusions for machines. And so the project we have here is called the Invisible Mask. And that was quite, and this is what I call a speculative publication exploring the attack on human agency and autonomy by facial recognition technologies. This is, at this period of time, the Invisible Mask is a baseball cap. It's actually built off this same very baseball cap. We ordered it from Amazon, and it had like a pack of caps on Amazon, and we decided to create the Invisible Mask. And the concept of the Invisible Mask is based on this academic paper here, which was really interesting. When I first came across the paper, it was when Mozilla commissioned us to be able to explore like a provocation for the 2019 Mozilla festival. And I came across this paper. I was very interested in this paper because Akil at the time had essentially kind of just said, hey bro, facial recognition technology is really interesting. It's like the password to our new world, but, especially scanning it on your face, scanning it on your phone. It's very nice. We in technology, we can really, design products that will enhance the beautiful features of facial recognition capabilities. But also, where we are coming from a experience where we have been policed by police officers most of our lives, even just for walking down the street, or even the way how we will police ourselves in terms of how we dress, how we look, so we probably didn't feel uncomfortable outside. I thought it was important for us to be able to address a situation like this. And so I was just, in the internet searching, coming up stuff, trying to find out things, and I came across this paper called "The Invisible Mask: Practical Attacks on Facial Recognition with Infrared." And the whole concept of infrared, right, as a technology, is that it's invisible to the human eyes, and so you could you could wear a cap. And the whole theory is that infrared light will emit at particular parts of your face, and what that would simply do is, when a facial recognition, a camera in that case is perhaps trying to, scan your face, because of most facial recognition cameras are beginning to use infrared technologies. The whole concept is you fight infrared with infrared. That's the concept behind the Invisible Mask. When I read this paper, I genuinely thought it was like, wow, these are interesting researchers who were, I don't know, just researching interesting things. What I didn't realize after reading it, after making the Invisible Mask, and I read it again, that it was actually a paper that was creating the mask to see how they can create facial recognition cameras to basically like evade the effects of the mask, if that makes sense. So they were trying to fool the model with the mask so they can improve the model so the models can't be fooled again, if hopefully that makes sense. And this takes me into a world of projects. I definitely weren't the first person to try to explore how to evade facial recognition systems. When I started this project and shared it with people, a project that came up to me a lot was CV Dazzle by the artist Adam Harvey. I think there's also a club called Dazzle Club, which I've never been a part of or joined, but I thought it sounded really cool. I know that their focus was to go around places in London and kind of identify where the facial recognition cameras are. It was like this kind of, piece of activism and also performance art in a way of how they conducted themselves. I'm not sure if it's still been going due to, the effects of the pandemic, but they're really interesting if you're interested to try them out. There was Hyperface as well by the artist Adam Harvey and the artist Hyphen Labs, who I'm very grateful to share a creative studio with. And they created this project called Hyperface, which was a prototype, and Hyperface is a scarf which has many faces, meaning that the model would, if you wear it, the models obviously would struggle at the time to detect your face. However, in recent times, machine learning models seem to be getting better and better with studies. Even now, some of these models are now going to gait analysis so they'll be able to analyze how you walk. So now, the level of sophistication is getting higher. There was this project which I came across, and it was called Incognito. And I think if you wear it on the face, it's meant to emit some energy. I've never really ever dig deeper into this project because I really liked it. I really liked how it looked stylistically, but I wasn't sure if there was any technological effect, or was it this light effect? Because you kind of see it. It kind of focuses on particular parts on the human face, hopefully trying to be able to evade the system. This was another project which I really loved. It's called Fooling Automated Surveillance Cameras, Adversarial Patches to Attack Person Detection. And so in this case here, you can kind of see in the image, and it's a really good video on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's quite funny. The individual of the patch cannot be detected by the facial recognition detector, while the person who's not wearing the patch is detected. And so so it's a really interesting project. So there has been people who have been exploring this area in different ways. The reason why I was really drawn to the Invisible Mask project really purely because it's visible. With the other projects that you kind of see, and even this in this case, if you're going to a protest, would you want to wear colorful clothes in a protest? No. Would you want to style your hair in a certain way in a protest? Possibly. But if you wanted to, I don't know, necessarily I wear caps a lot. I might wear a hoodie. And a lot of these things are not to create a state of anarchy in that case, but just in order for it, Akil describes it in a way of like, with GDPR, you were able to opt out, of certain things online. But in physical space, how do we opt out? How do we say no? I don't want to be captured on camera. I don't want to be seen. And there's obviously loads of arguments for why these things should be done. There's arguments for safety, arguments for security, privacy, and those particular things. And so it's an area that needs more discussion. It's an area that needs, I think, good debate and perspectives from all sorts of individuals. I don't think I'm a person who has the best expertise to communicate on why shouldn't face recognition cameras be there, or why should be there. But I am somebody who is interested in how they're stripping away of autonomy and agency with these technologies, especially when the communities that these technologies are being emplaced, these communities never really have a say. They never have a say. They never have the opportunity to speak or share about how they want things to be done for them, or how and how they can just really be able to walk around safety. And so that was a key thing for us in this project. There's also this really interesting paper which I actually forgot, which is called it's a really interesting paper, and it kind of talks about like one of the dangers of a project like this, and this is something that we kind of considered as well. Is I think at the time we were working on this, there was a lot of conversation on facial recognition was a big conversation in 2019. I think perhaps in 2020 that may be kind of reduced just due to what's going on in the world. But there was this interesting paper which talked about the dangers of artistic experiences, or masking camouflage and artistic imaginaries of facial recognition algorithms, and it talks about this the danger of doing these type of projects and how they can make people be anxious about algorithms. And I think that's a very fair point. I think that's why one of the key things I tried to do even in this talk from early on was to say computers are stupid, and that's something I've tried to maintain for a long period of time. I think the word artificial intelligence does not do this industry or this piece of work or this piece of technology I do any justice in any way, shape or form. So what we decided to do for Mozilla Festival is we had a couple options. So we had to be very careful of how real we make this to work, because especially at the time when we were working on this, I think there was a number of protests going on in Hong Kong as well, and so there's very for us it was quite it was like, how far do we go? You read all these books, it creates these prototypes. What does a prototype look like? How does it feel? And so, how we imagined this in a way was, and we did it in this way. I don't know if it will see clearly, but we have like we made everything as patchy as possible. We still left the wiring at the back. We still left the infrared camera this way, because the whole idea of, or the whole concept of the experience was like, this was somebody in the community who had hacked together this in this future. Well, really and truly, it was like, was how far in the future, I didn't even mention that with design fiction, there's obviously this concept of futures and how far in the futures and what's possible, what's probable, what's likely, what's not, all of those things. And it's interesting with this project because I think the future we saw it was probably, I don't know, it's 2019 when we worked on this, so maybe 3 years from then, I don't know, 4 years. Just because of how advanced a lot of the conversation in facial recognition technologies to be. And it was interesting because I saw this project as a tool again for community resilience and community resistance, where somebody can go into GitHub, download the code. If they have the abilities to DIY, they can also make their cap. So that was the whole thing of it, like this make a hacker tool, make a hacker kind of device that people can wear to protect themselves. That where I was kind of coming from. I never remember the clothing brand, but I remember there was a particular clothing brand in the 90s that was also protest clothing. I think they had a store in Soho. I can't remember why. I should have remembered it. And those things have kind of inspired me in a way where, like I said, the cap and this is very much the same shape. And so you can kind of see there where you've kind of got, I'm going to use the pointer for this one. You've kind of got the three sort of lights, the three LED lights. You've got the patchiness. You've still got the wires in the back. You've got the stitching. We were stitching this stuff in. You still got the camera on top of I think this is like lemon and ginger tea, and we tried to create this like stage experiment, and we sort of got people to come and try it out. What we did in the end is we simply played a game where people could just learn to evade the system. And like I mentioned about that aspect of being, I'm gonna make this full screen as I come to the end. That aspect of being able to be careful of how real we make it to be, and that was one of the key things. Because if it was too real, people ask you where's the code. Maybe if it's a bit too fake, maybe people are like, So it was also kind of trying to find that balance of where we would go. So we got like I don't even know what we call this, a model head, and we put the cap on the model head for the sake of one of the challenging things I wrote about infrared was that infrared, we don't know how much radiation infrared would have on the human ability, or like not human, sorry, not the human ability, but simply on the human skin. What is radiation? What is the danger of those things? What is the danger of those technologies? And so we just simply got people to just play with a sort of. We kind of created this thing called a Vader machine, and we kind of got people to do some activities, play a game, and yeah, and so that was kind of the space. But one of the key things about it that I really loved, it was more about the conversation, the discussions that we were able to have about, what is the role of facial recognition technology in our lives and in society? What is the ways and how we can necessarily engage in, taking back our autonomy, taking back our agency. One of the unfortunate things that I wasn't able to achieve for this project, especially when we had worked on this, was around October, November 2019. Obviously 2020 came, and 2020 kind of took, our goal was to spend some time in 2020 spending more time in this area of doing facial recognition workshops, being able to go into communities, being able to get their perspectives, especially Black communities, get into perspectives, because this was presented at Mozilla Festival, and thank you Mozilla Corporation for giving us the opportunity, but there wasn't many Black people there. So the whole purpose of creating maybe a project and grounded in that community, my critique of myself and my critique of the project would be that we didn't have the opportunity to expose this enough to the community as much as we wanted to. The world kind of went into a standstill last year So there's definitely there is definitely a vision for us to do more work in this area. The invisible mask has essentially just been catching dust in the studio, especially when none of us have been there. So there's definitely a goal for us to be able to further enhance this, improve this, even look at what more clothing can we add, what can we use as speculative provocation to have conversations with people about, yeah, just role facial recognition and just machine learning technologies in general being used, in law enforcement, being used by the government to make decisions on ourselves, and being able to engage in a critical conversation and even have those individuals and that work with these technologies or create these technologies to be in the same space as well. Let there be a discussion point. Let it be, give us the power, give us, we have the say. And that's always kind of been my goal from when I came across this machine learning space. Has always been about how do you demystify these technologies? How do you educate people on these technologies? But one of the things that my friend Sarah Gold always mentioned to me was also being careful of not only just educating people, but how do you not also then give people, make people feel burdened with this information as well. And that's kind of similar to that paper which I shared before about the anxiety causing people. So this is a very interesting space. It's one that I don't have the answers for, but yeah, thank you so much for listening to this talk or sitting there. This is Alex Fafega. This is the Great Black Hack, I should say. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of today.
Alex, thanks so much for sharing this talk with us today and for your super relevant contribution to the field of AI and creative technology. We've got a slightly longer break now, and we'll be back in 10 minutes for the last block of talks. See you in a bit. Welcome back, everyone. We're now in the last block of talks on creativity, technology, and social good with CCI. I'm honored to present the next speaker, Andrew Mallinson. He's an artist and writer based in London and co-founder of Feminist Internet, and he will be talking about the process of querying AI and how we can create technologies that center the needs of LGBTQ+ people, building towards new and more liberated futures.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today, and thank you to CCI for having me. My name is Andrew Mallinson, and I am an artist and writer and member of Feminist Internet. I'm here to talk to you today about what it means to queer AI, and what I mean by that is not simply queer as in the identity marker of being queer, although that is part of it. More specifically, I'm referring to the action of queering something. Before we get into that though, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about Feminist Internet and how my interest in this subject came to be. So for those of you listening who haven't heard of us before, Feminist Internet is a collective of artists and designers, writers, and just all-round great people. And our focus is on tackling internet inequalities through feminist practice. So that's taking ideas and methodologies of feminism to tackle injustices coded into the internet. For us, it's important to understand that the internet is a technology that reflects the same inequalities and injustices present in our physical lives. So by creating change online, in turn, we can create change offline. Our work comes in many forms, and we've run workshops that, for example, look to prototype a feminist Alexa. We've built chatbots that tackle AI bias and online abuse. And we've also got a podcast series that explored the theme of recoding spaces. So it's here in this idea of recoding spaces that I want to begin to dive into the subject of queering AI. So one of our podcast episodes was titled Recoding Utopias, the Importance of Queer Spaces, and it looked at how LGBTQ+ people are recoding spaces both online and offline into their own queer spaces, whether that's the club or a bookshop or a digital map. It's this idea of LGBTQ people taking up space, occupying it, and transforming it to meet their needs. But there's two separate things happening here. There's the queer space, such as the club, and then there's the action of queering the space, the transformation, the recoding. So I want to talk a little bit more about the difference here between queer space and the queering of space, and start to unpack this even further. First up though, I just wanted to simply define what I mean by the word queer. The dictionary defines it as denoting or relating to a sexual or gender identity that does not correspond to established ideas of sexuality and gender, especially heterosexual norms. Now, I personally prefer David Halpern's definition, which you can see on the screen here, where he states that queer is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. It is an identity without an essence. And I like this because it implies queer as having an action of being at odds with something, and that it's self-definable. So now that we've established that, back to these ideas of queer space and queering space. In an article on the economies of space for the Funambulist magazine, Reg Schult, who is a queer non-binary educator and community organiser, provides a really beautiful breakdown of this dichotomy between queer and queering space. So they think it's really important to distinguish that under the umbrella of queer space, there's further distinctions to be made. They state that there are both queer spaces and there are queered spaces. So queer spaces, they state, can be understood as what we might know of as safe spaces. So these are our LGBTQ community centres, our nightclubs, our bars and bookshops, and they exist in a state of perpetual queerness because they are run and owned by queer people. They are there solely for the purpose of supporting the needs of the community. That isn't to say that these so-called safe spaces don't come without their own problems. Racism and misogyny are still a prevalent issue within the LGBTQ+ community, and their existence continues to be at the behest of local council and governments and the pervasiveness of gentrification. This is why in London we've seen the closure of over 70 LGBTQ+ venues since 2006. It's also really important to note that in many countries, these spaces don't exist as safely as they do here. They exist underground at the risk of intrusion by law enforcement or far-right groups. So if that is the definition of queer space, what about queered space? Queered space is not necessarily about the possession of bricks and mortar purposed for LGBTQ people. It's about the action of transforming space through practice, through pressure. It is space that is transformed because of a demand, because of the need to create change. Schultz states that queer spaces are a point for the exchange of cultural and artistic ideas which allow for various kinds of transference. They come as a result of the suppression of much larger and more dominant power structures, which create the conditions for these spaces. So that could be laws that discriminate against LGBTQ people in the workplace, in the street, in their access to resources, things like that. I think this links back to David Halpern's definition of queer being at odds with something. These spaces are at odds with dominant power structures. So an example of queered space might be, say, if a group of LGBTQ+ people were to meet in a room in a town hall to organise community action against a local business that is discriminating against a staff member because of their identity. That room that they are in is being queered through their action. For 365 days of the year, it's not a queer space, but in that moment where it was occupied, it was. And in the action they are imposing on that business is one of queering, in their attempt to create a safer environment for LGBTQ+ people. Queered spaces weren't necessarily queer before they were occupied, but they are through action. Schultz beautifully states that queer spaces require queers behaving queerly, which is to say that queered spaces are not necessarily permanent, they can be temporal. They are queered so long as the behaviour of the subjects within them remains so. But as I mentioned before, so often LGBTQ+ people are coming up against much stronger systems of power, and these spaces can't remain queered. So how does this relate to AI and technology? Well, I think with this framing we can start to think of the internet, its technologies such as voice assistants, apps, online forums, as these potential spaces that could be queered. So let's begin with the internet by asking the question, does the internet meet the needs of LGBTQ people? I don't think the answer to that question is a simple yes or no. The internet and its technologies hold so much potential for liberation, particularly for the most minoritized in society. It's fostered connections between subcultures and allowed LGBTQ+ people to have access to materials and resources that were once completely out of their reach. Prior to the internet, access to queer culture meant being in proximity to it. For LGBTQ youth born in rural areas, this might mean moving to places like London and Manchester as soon as they came of age. The internet has completely closed that gap. Now you can go online and access forums, blogs, social media, music and film that connect you to a broader queer culture. However, this connectivity, this openness has also created a huge space for discrimination. Some of the most minoritized people within the LGBTQ+ community are those who are trans or non-binary. In information obtained by the BBC over the last 5 years, reports of transphobic hate crimes have quadrupled in the UK. We see this in the rhetoric online where Twitter has become an increasingly toxic place for transphobia. A really notable instance of this is the incident with J.K. Rowling this past summer and the ensuing media storm which bolstered transphobic narratives in the mainstream press. But it's not just overt transphobia that trans and non-binary people experience online. It's the continual confrontation of the coding of our binary understanding of gender into the systems of the internet. A really rudimentary place to understand this is online forums and surveys. So when we are signing up for an account on a website or an application, we are asked to provide our gender and sometimes the prefix to our name. More often than not, you're confronted with one of two options, male or female. And once you've selected and confirmed that option, it is usually immutable. And in only providing two options, male and female, the identity of non-binary people is completely erased and in turn invalidated. I would encourage you to try and think about this issue from the perspective of a non-binary person, someone who has struggled with their gender identity, with feelings of gender dysphoria, of not feeling at home in their skin. They sign up for a new application and they are confronted with the question of, are you male or are you female? But they are neither. They don't sit comfortably within either category, and they are forced to select one of them. In doing so, they are reminded that their body does not conform to society's norms. We can actually think of this as a form of online violence in which non-binary people have to forcibly misgender themselves. To cap all of this off, you're so often asked to tick that box to confirm whether the data you've provided is accurate, which in situations just like this, it's not. So what are the solutions to this? Kata Spiel, who is a non-binary academic specialising in critical participatory design, proposes a solution in their paper, How to Do Better with Gender on Surveys, which is applicable across many contexts. They propose a model where both male and female options remain, as well as the inclusion of non-binary, to recognise a gender identity that exists outside of male and female. They also propose to include prefer not to disclose and self-describe. Kata states that gender is a fluid, multiple and impermanent identity facet, and people should be able to choose more than one option if doing so describes their identity more accurately. If people prefer to choose not to disclose, other options should be disabled. Kata's inclusion of the option of self-describe is of particular note, simply in its framing as being self-describe. There has been criticism of organisations who, in an attempt to be more inclusive, have included gender selection options beyond male and female, such as custom or other gender. The use of the word other is particularly problematic in that this idea of the other is commonly used to describe anyone who exists outside of perceived normative identity factors. And by that I mean anyone who is either not heterosexual and or cisgender. By using language such as self-describe, you place the agency in the hands of the user. It is important to note that Kata highlights there are still compromises being made here. The usual need for categorization on such forms is centred in the need for data collection. But data collection need not come at the expense of trans and non-binary people's well-being. For me, what Kata proposes here is a process of queering, of disrupting pre-existing systems to meet the needs of LGBTQ+ people. The internet is not an inherently queer space, but it has the potential to be queered. Another really great example of how we might begin to repurpose pre-existing systems of the internet is artist and designer Lucas Larochelle's project, Queering the Map. They describe it as a counter-mapping project, so it subverts mapping applications to hold space for queer narratives. Basically, any LGBTQ+ person can log in and write an anecdote or a story and tag that story to a specific location. You can see an image of what that map might look like when you log on here. Creating a map that is populated not by businesses and the like, but by queer histories. So each of those black pins is an individual story. And if you zoom into certain countries, there's so many of them. And it's a really fantastic project, and I would encourage you to go on and check it out and just read some of the stories. You might find poetry, longer form writing. It's really beautiful. So Lucas was interviewed for the Feminist Internet podcast and had this to say about the potential of queering the internet.
I mean, the myth of the internet in its early genesis was that it would be a place that would liberate us from our bodily limitations and positions and the oppressions that were located around our bodies on vectors of race, class, gender, ability, etc. And we obviously know that this is not the case, that the utopian impulses of the internet have definitely not panned out for a variety of reasons. But I still feel very animated by that initial utopian impulse of the possibilities of the internet as this liberatory or queer space.
So what about when we start to think about more complex systems of technology? Over the past few years, facial recognition software has become embedded into the fabric of our daily lives. What was once quite a sci-fi concept is now a tangible and functional tool. We are unlocking our phones and paying for our shopping all with our faces. But this technology is also being developed for much more complex tasks. It's being developed for use in airports as a way of speeding up and advancing security. It's also being put to use by law enforcement to track criminals in larger crowds, such as perusing through CCTV of protests in an attempt to track down attendees. The Metropolitan Police were pretty open about doing just that this past summer at London's Black Lives Matter protests. Something to note here is the work of AI researcher Joy Boulin-Winnie, who highlighted not only the troubling ethical issues of using this technology at a speech in the US Congress in 2019, but she spoke specifically as to how facial recognition software was disproportionately misidentifying Black people. You can find this talk online really easily, and I'd really recommend it. She's in conversation with members of Congress in the House and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Another proposition for the use of facial recognition software overlaps with a highly contested LGBTQ+ rights issue, which was put forth by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in America, who openly discussed developing the tech as a way of identifying whether a man is trying to access a woman's bathroom. The technology would scan people on entry to the bathroom and sound an alarm should it identify such a person as being male. This was rightfully called out by trans advocacy groups, as such technology would need to enforce the idea that there are recognisable and easily identifiable sets of characteristics which make up the male and female face. This in turn would completely erase the identity of trans women who the technology could potentially deem to be male based on outdated prejudices about their bone structure simply because of the gender they were assigned at birth. So, taking a step back here from what is clearly a deeply problematic proposition of what facial recognition could be used for, I want to talk about the ways in which we are training such technologies and how it is discriminating against LGBTQ+ people. So, facial recognition software is being trained by being fed with data sets of thousands of faces, learning to recognise gender identities based upon the data to which these faces are categorised. In 2019, the University of Colorado published a study which showed that facial analysis services performed consistently worse on transgender individuals and were universally unable to classify non-binary genders. Further study, researchers collected 2,450 images of faces from Instagram, each of which had been labelled by its owner with a hashtag indicating their gender identity. The pictures were then divided into 7 groups of 350 images and analysed by 4 of the largest providers of facial analysis services. So these are IBM, Amazon, Microsoft and Clarify. They noted that on average, the systems were most accurate with photos of cisgender women, getting their gender right 98.3% of the time. They categorised cisgender men accurately 96.7% of the time, but trans men were wrongly identified as women up to 38% of the time. And those who identified as agender, genderqueer or non-binary were misgendered 100% of the time. The study speaks of the dangers of moving towards a future where such technologies are necessary to access facets of society. That again, these systems run the risk of reinforcing stereotypes of what you should look like if you want to be recognised as a man or a woman, and that impacts everyone. If we're building towards a more technologically social future, that future has to include everyone. The study proposes a series of solutions to mitigate against these problems, such as using self-identified gender in data sets, establishing policies to hold companies accountable for how these services are used, and recognising trans identity as a protected category within this context, among other propositions. And while all of these actions could be understood to be a process of queering, until LGBTQ+ people are actually being given the opportunities to be in the room and develop these technologies, and that is across every department, from research and development to design and implementation, they can never be truly queered. If we don't include LGBTQ+ people in the process of creating technologies, they will only continue to perpetuate the biases and in some case, the prejudices of those who created them. So what might a technology that has been developed from the ground up by LGBTQ+ people look like? Well, I'd now like to talk to you about a project that I had the absolute privilege of being a part of with Feminist Internet, and it's really the crux of what I'm here to talk to you about today. This past summer, in collaboration with conversation designer Camille Rincon, I had the opportunity of developing Queering Voice AI Trans-Centered Design, a short course which was run at the CCI. The course was grounded in Camille's incredible research that looks to understand the requirements of trans and non-binary people when using voice-activated assistants. Their research identified a series of design requirements as the primary needs for trans and non-binary people. These requirements were for specific considerations being made around privacy and data collection, that the device have a trans-specific purpose, that the interface include representative and gender-affirming personas, and that it was created by trans and non-binary people. So the goal of the course was to do just that and create a prototype purposed specifically towards trans and non-binary people, in turn queering voice AI. Incredibly, the participants for the workshop, which was formed through an open call, were comprised of a team of majority trans and non-binary people, which I think is very telling that if you create space for LGBTQ plus people that looks to positively centre their experiences, we will occupy that space. So in beginning to design the device, Cami had identified 3 areas that the voice interface might be purposed towards. These were public safety, access to healthcare, and connecting users to trans and non-binary media or services. Following some really fruitful discussion, it was decided the device would connect users to media created by trans and non-binary people. And I just want to pause and zoom out for a moment and really unpack why that decision was made. So there was a lot of discussion within the team that the purpose of the device had the potential to actively counteract narratives in the media that so often focus on the trauma of being trans and non-binary. Even looking back at what I've been talking to you about this afternoon was looking at how these technologies could have a detrimental effect on trans and non-binary people. The question becomes, what if we were to create technologies that actively centre the joy of LGBTQ people? In this case specifically, how can the device be purposed to centre trans joy? This intention established an action that became embedded throughout the design process, one that would act as our anchor throughout. To speak more specifically about the actual purpose of connecting users to media created by trans and non-binary people, the choice was made as a way of fostering connection and uplifting the work of people within the community, in turn centering and creating joy. LGBTQ representation has improved over the years on our screens and across various media, but it's extremely hard to build an exhaustive list of trans media in the way you might be able to compile a list of other media, and I say this from experience. In building the device, we tried to build a database of trans media, and it was really difficult. Media such as this is often not receiving big studio backing, so it tends to be shown at smaller film festivals or is buried in harder to find corners of the internet. Thus, it's not appearing as easily in search engines, it's not on streaming services. So this only goes to echo the experience of many LGBTQ plus people in that this content is so often forced to exist in the margins. That's not to say we didn't find any, we did find some fantastic media. But the goal of the team was to kind of counteract this narrative as loudly as we possibly could. So as we began to design the persona for the device, the team felt that it was important that it be as personable as possible, that it too was joyful, like a friend, or being what they described as like queer family. They decided on the name Sib, a sort of riff on sibling, but also a name that didn't have a specific gendered connotation. We created this film that visualises how an interaction with a prototype might play out, so I'd like to play a clip of that now and introduce you to Sib.
Hello, welcome to SIB. This is a pro-trans voice interface aimed at connecting the trans community to media created by trans people. Have you heard about our project before?
Yeah, I have.
Amazing! Would you like us to refresh your memory?
That'd be great.
SIB was created by a team of majority trans and non-binary people. Our purpose is to connect trans and non-binary users to amazing media created by their community.
So that was an initial interaction with Sib as you boot up the device. So as we began to decide how a user would interact with Sib, in response to Cami identifying within their research that the device must have representative and gender-affirming personas, the decision was made that users could assign Sib any gender identity they wanted, and that gender could be associated with a choice of voices. So here's a little clip of how that interaction plays out.
Fab, time to personalise your SIB. Would you like to chat with
Voice 1.
Voice 2.
Voice 3.
Yeah, could I have voice 1?
Thank you for that. Would you like to set a gender for your SIB? It doesn't need to have a gender, and a gender won't change its personality.
Yeah.
Let's do this. What gender would you like for your SIB?
Can she be trans femme?
We are now generating your persona.
Oh, congratulations. No offense to the other SIBs, but you chose the best one.
So what this does is again just place the agency in the hands of the user, allowing them to see themselves reflected in the technology they are using. I should note that having only 3 voices to choose from was just a limitation of what we could record during the course. If this device were to be fully built, it would include a multitude of voices. The idea also being that the voice you hear prior to the persona being generated would just be randomized. Now, there's an interesting discussion to be had here, as there's been a lot of critique around the way voice assistants reinforce negative gender stereotypes, placing the female voice into this subservient role as the assistant. At Feminist Internet, we've tried to tackle this within our work, most specifically in our Designing a Feminist Alexa workshops. One of the proposed solutions to this is to dehumanize these devices. But for us, in creating this device, I think it's really interesting to note that it actually became about humanizing it even further, going in the opposite direction, really imbuing the device with personality. And I think, again, that might be a sort of conscious countering to the way in which trans and non-binary people are continually dehumanized in the media. When it came to considerations around privacy, it was important for us that users are not bound to offer data by default, but rather that they can autonomously opt into providing information if desired. This enables users to personalize their privacy preferences and modify or delete their data. This is really important in the context of trans and non-binary people, as while having the option for the device to understand things like the user's pronouns, this data being on file and being subsequently leaked could be damaging for certain people, as they have chosen not to disclose their gender identity in certain aspects of their life. So it was really important that the users were able to choose how they interacted with the device and had autonomy over their data, and the data was only being used for the betterment of their specific interaction. So here's a little clip of how that might play out.
I want to help connect you to transmedia, but first, can I ask for some personal deets?
Sure.
Amazing. I can be used without storing any of your information, so no pressure to say yes to any of this. You can always say, protect my data, to come back and edit or delete your information. Would you like me to remember your name and pronouns?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Beautiful. What's your name then?
My name's Finn.
And your pronouns?
My pronouns are they, them.
Sounds amazing, Finn.
I'd like to highlight the work of Danielle Braithwaite-Shirley here, who was one of the course contributors. Danielle gave a lecture on their practice which seeks to archive the Black trans experience through technological environments. Danielle's considerations around the terms in which you interact with their work, in which you're asked to disclose your gender and race, really helped the team form their own specific terms and conditions for the device. Danielle's work is absolutely fantastic, and I'd really recommend you head to their website and discover their work. It really echoes a lot of the sentiments I've brought up this afternoon. It's just fantastic. So it was really, really important to the team that trans and non-binary people were involved in every step of the process. So the device was actually tested with Cammie's friend Cherub, a trans woman from Seattle, and it's Cherub's voice that you're hearing as the chosen voice of the device. Cherub speak with such warmth, and as someone whose profession is actually in the performing arts, the purpose of the device just serendipitously aligned with their work. So when Sib begins to share media with the user, the use of Cherub's voice just adds such a level of joy that's really warming to hear, I think. So lastly, I just wanted to play you a quick interaction of Sib sharing a piece of media with a user.
Oh my gosh, I know an out of this world film. There's a movie titled Transfinite. It's composed of 7 standalone stories. Would you like to hear more?
Yeah, please.
I can tell you more about the plot, the director, or just send you a link to watch it. What's it going to be?
Can I hear about the plot?
So, the movie is an hour and 10 minutes long. It explores power, the power to protect, to teach, to love, and to thrive. It's dark, funny, and visually expressive. Are you interested in that link?
That sounds great, yeah.
Enjoy it. I've been told I have great taste.
What's so wonderful about this project is the way that it's been queered at every level, from the design team assembled to the technology itself, at every stage from the ground up. The purpose, its persona, the considerations around privacy, this active queering just at every level was so wonderful to be a part of. And this is where I want to wrap things up today. What I think is so exciting about something like SIB, or the work of some of the artists I mentioned today, like Danielle and Lucas, is that it's not about a team of LGBTQ people being brought in as part of a move for diversity and inclusion to fix the problems created by big tech companies. The work is not a solution to the problems that exist within products like Alexa and Siri. It's the proposition of entirely different models for technology. And this is the point I want to try and make today, is that to queer technology, for me, is not to assimilate and fix the problems that big tech has created. It's to be at odds with these dominant power structures and to take the creation of technologies into our hands and build them and purpose them for ourselves. Thank you very much for listening.
Andrew, thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's exciting to be introducing our last speaker lined up for today's program, Jasmine Morris. Jasmine is a creative computing artist and educator based in London. Her personal practice and research explore representation and inclusivity within technology. She uses virtual reality and open source game development tools to create experiences that highlight issues surrounding gender, race, and power, focusing on the complexities within stimulating culture and identity. On this talk, Jasmine will expand on her computational practice and how gaming and cosplay are used as a medium for identity exploration, education, activism, and outreach.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really excited to be leading this talk for this wonderful conference full of wonderful people and wonderful things. So my name is Jasmine Morris. I work at the CCI and I work at Central St Martin's as well. I'll get into that in a little bit though. And today I'm going to be talking about how we can rewrite narratives through code in the context of empowerment, education, activism and outreach. And I've definitely put an accidental S on the end of outreach, but I'm going to continue anyway. So, first I'm going to speak about my practice. I've kind of broken this talk down into 3 sections. And I'm speaking about my practice because I do think it's quite relevant. However, the talk is less about me and more about society and movements. But I'm going to speak about myself a little bit and my career. And then at the end, I'll tie it all together and everything will make sense. And I'll kind of, talk about the main, kind of the most important thing, which is other people, really, and communities. So my practice, I am a creative computing artist and educator. So I make art with creative computing and I use that umbrella term because I use a lot of different software and tools and approaches to make work. Always trying something new. And I work in creative computing education, both at the CCI and at Central St Martin's and outside of that as well, which is also really important to me. I don't really like any of the super academic terms and I hate the word teacher. So I've kind of settled for educator because I guess like that kind of to me means that I spread information to people. So I look at representation and inclusivity within technology, predominantly using virtual reality and open source game development tools to create experiences that highlight issues surrounding gender, race and power. So often I'm looking at the roles of gender and queerness and how that can be reimagined through technology, how we can empower people through technology. Race, of course, I do a lot of work about being a mixed race person, and for my brown brothers and sisters, I try to make work for us to empower us. And power, I also focus on systems of power within the technology industry and the connotations of that. and I guess the power in distributing knowledge as well, which links back to my kind of role in education. I'm focused on the complexities of simulating culture and identity that comes through in cosplay particularly, and yes, I play role-playing games and participate in cosplay, and for me that is about extending my Caribbean identity through characters and narratives. And again, especially in these kind of niche areas, we really don't see enough representation, so it's really important for me to put myself out there and be loud about it in these kind of nerdy societies that I kind of socialise within. So this is some pictures of me doing cosplay. So this is part of my practice, but it's also fun. So on the left you can see I'm cosplaying Lara Croft. This was part of a larger piece that looked at the role of military in technology and also the representation of the female body and especially the sexualization of Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft. So it was very interesting for me to cosplay, to kind of walk in Angelina Jolie's footsteps, what that meant as like a large black woman, kind of cosplaying Lara Croft. And then on the right, I'm cosplaying Sonic here. This one was a little bit of fun. Sonic is iconic, pardon the pun, but this one for me, it was about the wig and the lipstick, because like this electric blue colour is so popular like in Caribbean culture. Like you see a lot of aunties wearing this electric blue lipstick and this like electric blue colour, and I was like, wait a minute, I can seriously do something with Sonic here and this colour that I'm so used to seeing like older family members wear and just like women around. So yeah, this piece was a bit of fun, and when I do cosplay, I'm not necessarily trying to completely replicate the character, because I think that it's already been done. I guess the character's already been created, in my opinion, without people like me in mind. So it's not really interesting for me to try and be Sonic or try and be Lara Croft or whoever I'm cosplaying. It's about accepting myself and, embracing my identity and reliving it through a character. So I guess my cosplay is more inspired by famous characters rather than, trying to replicate them. Anyway, this is a snapshot of a piece I made called A Collection of OBJs. This was a virtual reality piece. It was a 360 experience, and this was the VR piece that coincided with the Lara Croft cosplay. So this was a wider research project that really looked at bodies against machinery and guns, desensitization that comes along with gaming. So I guess like the placement of these objects next to one another, stripping away the materials and the texture, it was really to kind of highlight how they're all kind of these digital objects that we kind of have the power as a player to manipulate and use, and become potentially quite desensitized to quite heavy topics. So that was a collection of objects. And this is a snippet from a game that I've recently made, actually. This is my most recent work. It's so difficult to find the time to make work at the moment, but I did pull this together a few weeks ago now. So this game is called 50 Shades of Brown, and as I said, this is a kind of snippet from the game. I've made it into a GIF, which is hilarious, and I've got a slide about it actually. So 50 Shades of Brown is an exploration of digital skin tone and what representation in online spaces could look like. The buttons in the game are each a hex code for a different shade of brown, a simulation of brown skin. The categorization of colour and reference to the erotic drama 50 Shades of Grey explores the problematic fetishization of people of colour, both within and outside of the sex industry. This game was made to highlight the lack of representation of people of colour in online space and to celebrate people of colour and the differences between us. What does it feel like to see something so political in society reduced to its raw digital pigment? So that's my kind of explanation of what this piece means to me and what I'm trying to highlight there. And, you know, pieces like this really come from my early practice, which I guess my whole practice was kind of inspired by my love for kind of like simulation games. But, you know, until recent years, like, it's been really difficult to recreate characters that I identify with, whether that's due to a lack of skin tone variation, hair, even like jewelry, clothes that I identify with. And I feel like, yeah, I guess that's cool for some games, but like when it's meant to be replicating life, and I've always just felt a bit like I can't fit in and like I can't make myself. So I've always thought about, yeah, I guess this was a very physical way of exploring this idea of, well, yeah, 50 Shades of Brown. It was kind of me just saying, look, like if I can do this, if I can pull 50 Shades of Brown from like a colour chart, why can't the game industry do a little bit better? And of course I'm referencing other things as well. Anyway, the game industry is doing a little bit better, and that's really nice to see. But I guess I'm still heavily inspired by my experience and kind of, yeah, like growing up without any of that stuff. So now I'm going to move on and speak about my career. So I guess you've got a bit of an idea of who I am as an artist. As I said, I definitely don't get enough time to make work. So yeah, that's something I'm going to work on 2021, hey ho, if anything happens. But yeah, I'm going to speak about my career now. And for a while, I saw them as separate things. I saw my practice and my career as separate entities. But I'm very blessed because I think in the last couple of years, I've started to see that actually my career is just an extension of my practice. And as I was kind of touching on at the beginning, it's really important for me to share knowledge with people. And I guess that's my main thing. Like, I just think that it's a really empowering thing to do. And when I'm criticising, I guess, like design and technology for their poor design and poor consideration of diverse people, and whether that's brown people, queer people, people with neurological differences, whatever it may be, for me, the most empowering thing that I can do is educate the next generation of designers and try to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. Anyway, my career. So this is a really early thing that I did, and this is kind of, it was really nice looking back on this actually. This was one of the first bits of teaching that I did. I was in my second year of university, and I taught university and master's students immersive technology, virtual reality, AR, and yeah, general immersive technology with a group of wonderful people from the Digital Maker Collective. Shout out to the Digital Maker Collective, by the way, and Chris Follows, the founder of that. But yeah, we found ourselves, running this module immersive, which was great. And yeah, we were in Somerset House for a week or 2 weeks. I'm still in touch with some of the people there as well. It was actually a fantastic entity. And yeah, we facilitated some wonderful virtual reality pieces. And I guess from there, I was like, okay, like, wow, I'm teaching tech. Like, this is cool. Let's see where this is going to go. This is like another career highlight of mine. This is way more recent. Well, time flies. I think this is 2019, the summer of 2019. This is the wonderful Hyphen Labs ladies and team Tate Exchange. If you don't know about Tate Exchange, it lives on the 5th floor of Tate Modern, which isn't open at the moment, but maybe one day it will be again. But yeah, this was a great, a fantastic thing that we did. If you want to look it up, you can look up Hyphen Labs at Tate Exchange Higher Powers. So this was a huge 2-week long intervention, and we ran workshops and talks, and we had so many famous people there. We had Caroline Cinders, we had the dude from The Great Hack, Memo Acton, like loads of like creative technologists just here, like making things happen, having important conversations with the general public. And it's important for me to speak about the general public because doing things like this and working with the general public, like whatever that means, I guess the people that go into galleries, but still it's something. It made me realise that I really enjoyed sharing knowledge, and I really enjoyed speaking with people and kind of like empowering them and getting them involved in conversations that they're often excluded from. This was a great thing. This was a workshop that I did in collaboration with the Institute of Coding and Sisterhood. This was working with young women and people that identify as female or non-binary, and again, just doing creative techie stuff. It was always a dream for me to work with the Institute of Coding, so I'm really glad I got to in the end. This was, again, more recent. I guess this is a good example of things that I do outside of work, things that I get asked to do and things that I ensure that I'm involved in, because as much as working in higher education is important to me and it's great, it's also important for me to be involved in other things, because higher education only has so much reach and it almost like doesn't fill my cup of like need. So I make sure I'm involved in loads of other things as well, and this is a good example of some of the cool things I have the privilege of being involved in. STEMettes, shout out to STEMettes. They're a charity that work with, again, young women and people that identify as female or non-binary to get them into the STEM industry. They've got a society that is hundreds of young people deep, and they do amazing things, events, panels, talks, school trips. Anne-Marie Maffedon is the founder. She's a very famous mathematician and an inspiration of mine. And I got to work at STEMettes, and I can't believe that I've left already. I was there for a year, and then I guess my career moved really fast and I couldn't fit it in anymore, but I'm still an ambassador for them. And again, it was great career development for me, like, I guess, making lots of connections in the tech industry and working with young people and, again, empowering young people. And to be honest, I'm really excited about the next generation of designers and technologists and scientists and engineers that we've got coming, because there is an absolute storm coming, and I always say that. I said that after the Institute of Coding workshop as well. There is a serious storm coming. And yeah, I run Tech Yard for the Creative Computing Institute. This is a great screenshot of me mid-workshop. So that is an ongoing thing, and at the moment, you know, that is the thing that I'm feeling very passionate about, and I'm really grateful that the CCI support me to run this initiative, and it's growing and it's doing amazing things. So we run weekly workshops with young people. We're working with 11 to 14-year-olds at the moment from South East London. And I get guests in to run things. I run things myself. It's great. Again, the young people are amazing. I love working with them. And yeah, it's just really important for me to ensure that I'm doing this groundwork, this outreach work. Georgina supports me, but I pretty much sit and send emails out and just try and get people involved and speak to some amazing people and plan this amazing program. And I just feel so privileged that I'm able to do that, and it really is my dream to work with, like, not necessarily young people, but just anyone that wouldn't usually have access to this very elite industry. And it's important for me to be who I am and to lead these sessions in the way that I lead them and make people feel as included and listened to as possible. So Tech Yard is amazing, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, and thank you so much to the CCI for, you know, supporting me through that. And then yeah, I didn't want to put pictures about it all, and I didn't want to talk about it all for too long. Wow, I'm actually doing okay for time though, that's good. But I've also done loads of other things, and to be honest, seeing it all like this, I guess no wonder I'm a little bit burnt out and a little bit tired sometimes. I guess I've done quite a lot and my career has really snowballed, and I'm not saying this to big myself up, but I guess it's become important for me to appreciate what I've achieved because of the next section that I'm going to come on to. It will all make sense when I wrap this talk up in the third part. But yeah, each and every experience that I've done, each and every career step has been meaningful, and I've been involved in so many things with so many wonderful organisations, and the connections that I've made keep on connecting. There's this like spider web of amazing talent and amazing people that like is just forever growing. And yeah, I guess, shout out to Projects by IF, a technology studio that focus on data privacy. They work with brands to ensure that they're following guidelines, and they advise people on how to. They're a great studio because they're actually doing something that not enough people are doing. Not enough people are talking about the whole data thing that is happening in the background of everything. So yeah, I've had the privilege of working with them, and that really made me realise how important it is when I'm teaching design to also teach privacy. Otherwise, the same mistakes are going to be made over and over again. It's too easy to make the mistakes. I've worked with Building Imagination. That's a school club that works with like Lego and robotics. So back when schools existed, I used to run an after-school club with them, which was great. Again, working with young children. They were actually children. They were actually kids. I'm not going to call them young people because they were like 5. They were so cute and so intelligent. And also I got to play with Lego, so that was great. Ran a summer programme for University of the Arts London this summer just gone actually, which was great. Again, I got to connect with loads of young people based in the CCW campuses, so that was Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon. Not quite sure if I hit Chelsea, to be honest, but we definitely got some young people from Camberwell and some young people from Wimbledon involved, and that was just like arts and crafts, and obviously a little bit of it was techie because I can't help that, but had to pull some of my artist friends in that do actual like I guess like can make things out of recycling and stuff, because that's not really my forte. But yeah, summer programme for them was great. Working with organisations like 2 to 3 Degrees, a fantastic organisation that works with young people. I've done tech workshops with them, with Julia, my creative technology bestie. Neon Digital Arts Festival, which is in Dundee. That was in a shopping centre, and I got to lead a gaming workshop with, again, the general public. Trustee for Trajectory Theatre. I feel like I'm going on a little bit now, but you get the gist. And yeah, we're at present times, and I lecture at the Creative Computing Institute in the Creative Practice unit, and I'm the lead digital tutor at Central St Martin's, and obviously, as I said, I run Tech Yard, and I do whatever else I can squeeze into the week as well. Now, I have spoke about all of that for a reason, and I'm going to tie it all together. This wasn't a space for me to just talk about myself for half an hour, but I do think it was relevant because I'm now going to speak about my story and why I've done what I've done and why I've built this spiderweb, I'm going to call it, this network, and what the future might look like for that as well. So I grew up on a council estate in West Yorkshire. If you can't already tell, I'm from Yorkshire. And I grew up in extreme poverty. My mum was on benefits, like everyone on the street was on benefits. It was like, you know, I'm not going to like polish it. It was a rough estate. I mean, there was some amazing people that happened there, and the community was amazing. And I don't want to paint it in a negative light, but there was also a lot of crime and a lot of hardship and just a lot of general poverty in the area, and it was difficult growing up. Of course, I had limited access to technology, and I guess that's something that's always stuck with me. And, you know, as a gamer now, it's interesting because I think there were so many barriers for me to access the gaming industry, and that's why it's so important for me to participate, whether it's gaming, cosplay, making work about gaming, criticising the gaming industry, whatever it is. I think that's why it's so prevalent in my practice, because for so many reasons I couldn't access gaming. It was too expensive for a start, but even if I did manage to get my hands on the console or whatever, then, you know, what I spoke about in my practice, there was the racial boundaries, the identity boundaries, the kind of logical boundaries. I was going to call this talk I Used to Be Scared of Code, and then we decided it wasn't the right title, but I did used to be really scared of code and technology because I didn't even get a laptop until I was like 13 or something. So it doesn't come natural to me, and that's why I'm giving this backstory, because I've ranted on about my successful career in creative technology for long enough now, and I think that it's really important for me to be transparent. And yes, code is scary, and we need to remember that when we're teaching it, and it's not accessible to everyone. but I've proven to myself that, you know, for someone that didn't naturally take to tech, I've built a successful career in it. So someone at some point, including myself, must have done something right. But yeah, I was resistant to education. I was one of those naughty kids, getting excluded all the time. I don't know how I made it through school, but then I did kind of knuckle down in college, and I guess that's how I made it to uni. And I felt like a statistic a lot of the time. I felt like my path was already written for me, and I'd kind of accepted it. And that's what everyone around me was doing. And yeah, I guess like you hear yourself being spoken about on the TV, like, and that's why I'm very funny about terms and, you know, terms like hard to reach and, you know, it's postcode areas and catchment area, whatever, because like it, you know, as someone that experienced it, you do just end up feeling like a statistic, and you can kind of tell when they're like targeting you, and it's like, you know, you're somewhat resistant to it because you feel a bit like you're being like picked. Anyway, yeah, so I guess that was my experience, and I'm going to close the talk with some powerful statements that hopefully tie this talk together and help make sense of everything that I've said. So yeah, I guess I'm going to close with my learnings and the learnings that I'd like to pass on to this audience, whether you are an academic or a young person yourself, or a creative technologist or a designer or an artist, or whatever you are. I guess I'd like to leave with these messages, and hopefully that's going to tie up the segments of the talk, because now I've done it, I'm worried this was all a little bit random. But yeah, firstly, the value in the education system, and UAL have not paid me to say this, but if it wasn't for the education system, I would have been completely lost. I followed it, as I said, I scraped through high school, and then I got to college and I was kind of like, okay, maybe I can do something. And then I got to my foundation, and then I really found a passion for art, and I guess I grew up a little bit, so I wasn't as much of a little, you know. And then I went to uni, and then all of a sudden, as I said, by my second year I was teaching at Somerset House, and you can imagine how ironic's not the word, obscene that was for me. It really was. A lot of experiences in my second and third year, I always tell this story, and I think it really sums up what I was going through. But I was going to these like networking events, like these tech ones, like at places like Digital Catapult in Central, and like here East, like places like that. And they're the kind of places where, like, when you go in, you leave your coat and bags like on a coat hanger outside, and then you go in. And I'd honestly never been anywhere like that before, and I was like so like funny about leaving my stuff, because like where I come from, like if you leave a coat and a bag, like, you know, it's quite obvious what's going to happen to it. And like just little things like that, like learning the language of, like, I guess like a higher class in society, and that was another like boundary that I had to come through. And I guess now I'm more confident and I've learned to just be myself, but like at the time I was, you know, I wasn't an imposter. It wasn't imposter syndrome. I guess I was an imposter, and I was just trying to do a thing and I guess it worked. But yeah, anyway, the value in the education system, I still believe in it because I believe it's a big part in what helped me, but that is not to say that it's not flawed, and not to say that it's not our responsibility as academics to work from within it to help and change it, because institutions take too long to change. So it's a big statement, but I would argue that your role as an educator is to do the groundwork, because we can't wait for the institutions to change, and there's too many problems going on now. But please believe in it and don't lose faith in it, because I guess it can change lives. Representation matters, and that's why I've remained authentic. Representation matters because if I would have had someone that looked like me that worked in tech or art or anything that I was interested in, maybe I would have been a little bit less reluctant to do it, to learn, to engage in things. And I know that I just know that I don't want any young person to have to go through that again, and I can't change the world, but I know that rather than turning into something that I could have turned into, like rather than becoming everyone that I was seeing at those networking events at Here East, I just kind of remained authentic to myself. And that's why it's really important for me to have my acrylics and wear my jewellery and like wear what I want and like let my body be, because there's not enough people that I guess look like me and talk like me and do things like me. And I think it's important to make space for us. And yeah, to empower other people that feel the same, to know that it doesn't matter like what your aesthetic is or how you speak or how you're going about something, as long as you've got something interesting to say, like, you know, all voices should be heard. So for me, it's been really important to remain authentic to myself. And I think, again, everyone should understand that that's why representation matters, because people need to see people that they can relate to properly engage, I think. I'm a big believer in open source and sharing knowledge or knowledge exchange. Open source technology, you know, means that people can learn things that technically, you know, you can get paid a lot of money for from their bedroom, and all they need is access to Wi-Fi and I guess like even a smartphone. And I'm not saying that everyone's got access to that, because they haven't. And you know, especially with the pandemic, it scared me a bit, because a lot of things have moved online, and we need to understand that not everybody is digitally literate. However, I'm still, you know, a big advocate for making things as open source as possible and sharing knowledge. The only way we're going to regain power is through sharing knowledge and empowering people that wouldn't usually have access to that knowledge. So yeah, there are a few coders out there that really also believe in this, and it's really warming to see that. I guess like the whole P5.js community really stand for this, and you know, I'm sure there's loads of other examples as well, but for me, I will distribute knowledge to anyone that I can, because for me that's a way of kind of, yeah, regaining power from, I guess, when we're speaking about big things like the technology industry and large institutions, it's one of the ways to kind of, again, like come back down to the groundwork and work with like real people. So remember that the creative and the technology industry is very exclusive, and when they're mushed together, it's terrifying, because the tech industry is already very exclusive, and so is like art and its history and its origins. Like, I studied fine art and I know how exclusive it is. So when they're mushed together, it's terrifying. But from my experience, when creative and computing do go together, something interesting happens, and somehow there is space for people like me. And I guess maybe that's how I've kind of got to where I am, and I'm able to do what I'm doing, and why I know so many other amazing people in the creative computing industry that are kind of singing the same song, or maybe with slightly different lyrics, but also really important. Some of them are also on this like lineup, so I hope you've listened to their talks as well. But as exclusive as it is, something exciting happens, in my opinion. And yeah, I guess space is made for voices, and we can use technology as a construct to re-identify ourselves or to explore our identity and empower other people to explore theirs. And I think this is the last one. It's going to be annoying if it isn't, because I've said that now. But I'm going to treat it like it's the last one, and then if it's not, then I'll treat the actual last one like it's the last one. But yeah, empower people to design a better future. And I guess that speaks for itself. It's what I think that I'm doing, and it's what I think, again, everyone should be doing. If you're an artist, an educator, whatever you are, share the knowledge that you have, exchange the knowledge that you have, and empower people, not just young people, but everybody, a diverse range of people, to design a better future, because we need a little bit of hope, especially in this climate. Nope, it wasn't the last one. I knew it wouldn't be. Okay, so yeah, I'll quickly speak about this Trojan horse theory that I have. And I guess, yeah, this summarises everything. So I've been describing myself as a Trojan horse for a long time, and as I've explained, I don't necessarily relate to the institutions that I work for. and some of the kind of companies that I've been involved with and the culture there. Not to say it's a bad one, but it's just not relatable for me. I've got my safe spaces, I've got my friends, I've got my communities, and they don't necessarily, apart from the CCI, they don't necessarily exist like in these large institutions. But I Trojan horsed it, and I went into academia and education for a reason, and it's because I believe that like through being inside something that has so much potential for positive change, I can do the groundwork and help to make that positive change happen. And I know that there are loads of other people doing the same. So be a Trojan horse and get yourself into somewhere and change it from within. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that was okay and not too random. Yeah, thank you for listening. That was me talking about narratives and code and empowerment and education and activism and outreach, and hopefully it all makes sense now. And have a great day.
Wow, thanks so much, Jasmine, for this wonderful presentation. We've come to the end of the conference now, and I am personally mind blown at the level of passion and commitment to creating fairer and more accessible technology from all the team here at CCI. So a huge thank you to Mick, Phoenix, Pix, Alex, Andrew, and Jasmine. And of course, a huge thank you to all the team across UAL that has made this conference possible. And especially to Barbara Denton and Nick Fu, who pushed for Tech for All from the very beginning. There is no doubt technology and creativity can be powerful forces for good, but to transform communities, they need to be accessible, equitable, and inclusive. At the Creative Computing Institute, we will keep exploring the ways that creative computing can help transform existing technologies and make new ones that contribute to social change for the good. I hope that today's presentations by CCI staff members inspired you in many ways. Thanks so much for joining us today. To stay up to date with CCI, you can follow UAL_CCI on Twitter and Instagram, and you can also subscribe to our brand new and beautiful newsletter on bit.ly/CCI newsletter_sign-up. And of course, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content. I hope you enjoy this afternoon's workshop with activism and tech with Risebox Studio starting at 2:30 p.m. And hopefully we will see you again soon on the internet. I hope you have a lovely afternoon ahead. Thanks everyone for watching.